We are living through history's greatest opportunity for change. The collapse of unsustainable systems is forcing us to rethink how we live, but the future depends on whether we can embrace this moment with courage and vision. In this speech, Gregg Braden reveals that we are the rare generation straddling the end of a 5,000 plus year cycle at the dawn of a new world age. He explains how science confirms ancient wisdom about Earth's cycles and the profound role of the human heart in shaping reality. By choosing cooperation over conflict and harnessing the transformative power of gratitude and compassion, we can align the natural rhythms of change and build a sustainable future. This is our moment to define history. The chaos we face today holds the promise of a better world if we are brave enough to choose it. Special thanks to our partner Liz Dawn for giving us this exclusive content to release on our YouTube channel. Believe.
I'm going to ask you to consider what a really powerful being it takes to live the life that you're living right this minute. Because you and I are living a rare and mysterious time, a precious moment in the history of civilization, in the history of human evolution. The last human that experienced what you and I are experiencing right now walked this earth about 1,700 years before the biblical exodus from Egypt. That's how long the conditions it's been since the conditions on earth are what they are right now. You are straddling two very, very different realities, but no one in our culture is telling us this. The mass media has chosen to discount or to focus upon the frightening and the scary elements of the change. No one has told us that we are living this rare, precious opportunity, this moment of opportunity. It takes a powerful, powerful being to live in a world with all of the systems that have been put in place to live life as we know it today. And we, as adults, have learned to master those systems pretty well to some degree, on the one hand. On the other hand, we're living the time when the systems that no longer work are falling apart faster than anyone ever imagined they would fall apart. And we're being asked to embrace a new way of living that is not quite fully here yet. One generation has to live this bridge. One generation has to straddle these two ways of living. And you and I happen to be that rare generation. When everything works perfectly, there's little opportunity for change. And what we're now being told by some of the best minds of our time is the chaos that we are living as the result of the breakdown of unsustainable ways of life. That chaos is an evolutionary trigger that allows us to catapult ourselves, not to slowly change and develop, but catapult ourselves into a powerful, life-affirming, sustainable way of living in a single generation. But we've got to know what's happening to know what choices to make. And that's what I'd like to share with you in here today. I think once we understand the facts, the path becomes obvious, the choices become clear. Without those facts, it looks like, and this is a direct quote from my mom, my 4 foot 8 inch tall, 112 pound mom, who I spoke with the day before we came to the airport to come on this trip. If you don't know the facts, if you don't have a context, it looks like the world is going to hell in a handbasket. That's mom's feeling. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. This is so interesting to me because if we look closely at what seems to be falling apart, the only things that are breaking down in our world are the ways of life that are no longer sustainable. Unsustainable ways of life that cannot hold up in the presence of the change that we're seeing in our world. If we understand the change, then it becomes obvious why these things aren't working. So that's what I'd like to do today. If you're like me, you want to know where we're going. We will talk about 2012, but I've got to tell you, for me, I think 2012 may be a non-event. Anybody else feeling that way? I'm just going to tell you right now why I believe that. First of all, how many of you have seen a lot of the very frightening images portrayed in those authoritative media specials on the cable channels? Are you seeing about 20? I know we saw the movie. Did everybody see the movie 2012? You know, I haven't seen it yet. I think I'm the only one that hasn't. I was going to watch it on a plane, and I don't like to watch the world falling apart while I'm in the air. Just if we do program our reality, it's not what I want to be thinking about at that moment. So the media is really focusing on some of the very frightening prophecies and predictions for 2012. If they were accurate, however, here's what they would say. If we look closely at those indigenous traditions, from Edgar Cayce to Nostradamus to Gene Dixon to the Hopi and the Navajo, the Tibetans, the Andeans. We're going to talk about some of these in just a few moments. What they all say is this. They say that we're at this critical crossroad in the history of our world where we must choose, and they say these are the choices. We either follow a very dark path where things fall apart, or we move into a beautiful, life-affirming world of peace and balance. But they say that we must make that choice. But if you look closely, 2012 is not the date that they say those things will happen. 2012 is the end of a cycle of time in the Mayan calendar and the beginning of a new cycle. And what those prophecies say is that 2012, it's the beginning of the new world. It means that everything that's going to break down for the beginning of the new world has to happen before 2012. It means we're living it right now. We're living the breakdown right now. So I'm just going to begin with some of the facts for this 2012 cycle of time. My fiancée and I, Martha, have just come back from 3.5 weeks overseas, sharing this kind of information in other countries. Now, I just want you to know, you are not alone in your experience of the change, in the uncertainty of what's happening. But I also want you to know that we've got a family out there that is so absolutely positive that we've got a beautiful new world in front of us. People all over the world know, they sense, they feel that we are on the verge of a time that is very, very different from the last 150 or 200 years of suffering and war and violence. That this generation is the generation that's going to walk away from the use of war as our first response to solving our differences, that war is about to become obsolete in our lifetime. Do you think that's possible? Is that possible? I think we're going to see it. And I want you to know it's not just people in this room, and it's not just New Age or New Thought people. These are mainstream politicians. We were in Zurich, Switzerland, and we had the former president of the World Bank was on the front row with his wife. And it was really interesting. He was very stoic. He'd be a good poker player. And it was hard to read what he was saying, but his wife was going like this. And at the end of the program, he came up and he really thanked me and appreciated the kind of program because it gives meaning to the change that they're seeing as well. People all over the world are on board with the sense that we are now moving into this era of change and that it's a positive change. It's not the frightening outcome that we've been shown. So 2012, what does it mean? First of all, it is a fact. I'm just going to begin with a series of facts. It is a fact that you and I are living the last years of a rare and mysterious cycle of time. It's a 5,125-year-long cycle called a great world age. That's a fact. And it is a fact that there have been at least 4 world ages before this one. We're living the 5th world age, the last years of the 5th, moving into the 6th great world age. And it is a fact that each time a world age has ended in the past, it has brought chaos to the people living upon this earth during that time. Not the end of the world, it brought chaos to their way of life. And here's the reason why. It's exactly what's happening now. You'll see that the earth is changing in response to a cycle, a rhythm, a natural cycle, a natural rhythm that changes the way we must live in our world. And if we do not have the resiliency, if we don't have the flexibility to meet that change, it's devastating. And that's what happened to some of the great civilizations in the past. You're going to see some of the greatest civilizations in the past collapsed. And they disappeared when they reached the point in their cycle where we are now because they made a mistake that we can still avoid. And I'll just share with you right now, the mistake was this. When the world changed, in their fear of the disappearing resources and the way of life that had become familiar to them, they began to fight one another, to grab the last vestiges of water, of food, of forests that they could burn for fuel. And in the fighting, everybody lost. Nobody won, and those civilizations collapsed. We've got to ask ourselves, are we making that mistake today? Well, I'm going to let you make a choice as we go through this. But these are some of the facts. It is a fact that the cycles are triggered by Earth's location in space. Where we are in space is what is triggering the experiences and the effects that we're having here today. And it is a fact that the only systems that appear to be breaking down are the systems that are no longer sustainable in our world. Let me give you an example. Here's what I mean by that. Many of you have been students of this change and have been waiting for this World Age 2012 experience since, 60s, 70s, or 80s. So for you, it's not new. When the economic system broke just a couple of years ago, that really got a lot of people's attention. And so for them, it just happened. For many of you, you've known that this time was coming. An economic system based on markets that have to get bigger and bigger, where one person benefits at someone else's loss. That is not sustainable in the long run. Maybe it worked for 100 years or so, but it's not going to work forever. I'm not surprised the economic system is breaking down. It's not sustainable in the presence of the changing world that we have today. A power grid for a planet, creating electricity by burning a finite source of fossil fuel that destroys the very planet we cherish. That's not sustainable in the long run. But these are the things that are breaking down right now. It's also a fact that choices that you and I are making right now, in the next 18 to 24 months, this little window of time, we have this rare opportunity to redefine some of the greatest systems of this planet and make the choices to move forward in a peaceful, sustainable way. Next 18 to 24 months are going to tell the story. And it's this generation, it's you and me right now. That's why it's so important. All of these different speakers that are here this weekend are all helping us to think differently about ourselves and our relationship to the world. What the science now is showing is that when we change the way we think about ourselves and our world, that change, that shift in thinking actually affects the way decision makers, policy makers, leaders of nations, CEOs of corporations, it affects the way that they think and the kinds of policies that they choose. And that is going to be really vital. So these are some of the facts of where we are right now in 2012. This is not the first 2012 that Earth has ever experienced. It is a cycle of time. However, the cycles are so big that when people begin one of these cycles, they usually don't live to the end because it's over 5,000 years long. Rarely do people, I won't say never, but rarely do people live 5,000 years on Earth any longer. Maybe they used to, I don't know. So if we know where to look in the past, it gives us a really good idea of what we can expect today and in the future. And when we talk about making these choices, what is the language of that choice? Is it simply saying, I choose peace, or is there something else that we can do? All of this is what I'd like to cover here in this next 90 minutes or so. And the brochure said, after that, much, much more. So we're even going to do more than that. We're just not sure what it is right this minute. All right? I want to begin. There are many places in this program where one topic could be the whole program, and we simply can't address it well. So the material is going to come from 3 primary books. One of them is The Divine Matrix. It was released in 2008. It is the science that describes the field of energy that connects all things that our spiritual traditions have always talked about. So if you want more information about that, that's the book. The second book is The Spontaneous Healing of Belief, that describes the language, the heart-based language that you and I are born with, that communicates with the field that connects all things. I just want to ask you, doesn't it make perfect sense? Well, let me ask you, I'm going to back up another question. How many of you believe that we are in this world as a result of an intentional act of creation, that we're not a fluke or an accident of biology, that there's some intelligence underlying our existence? I believe that as well. I don't know who or how or what, but scientifically, I have to tell you, the statistics, it doesn't make sense that we would be an accident of biology. And if we are here on purpose, it makes tremendous sense that we would not be plopped down in this world with no ability to heal our bodies or to create peace in our families and our communities. We were born speaking a language, but it's not a verbal language. It's a language of emotion. The very language that was edited out of the Western biblical text in the 4th century. The power of the human heart and human emotion to influence the field, to heal our bodies and bring peace. That's what this book is all about. The last book is Fractal Time, that describes the cycles of time and why now it is so important for us to understand the language that speaks to the field and how that field works. So if you want more information about those, you know where to go with those. We are living what the best minds of our time now call a time of crisis. They say that this moment of crisis is actually an evolutionary trigger for change. If things were not in a moment of crisis, there would be no impetus for the change. I used to have an aversion to the word crisis, but I've really grown to appreciate it now. Because now I understand that when we live in a crisis, it means the problem isn't over yet. We still have time to do something about it. And so it's a good thing that the crises are present. The best minds of our time are telling us that you and I are living the greatest number of crises and the greatest magnitude in recorded human history. And it's not just at conferences like this. I wanted you to see, this was a special edition of Scientific American. It was released in September of 2005, so it's about 5 years old. The title tells the whole story. Look at the title. Crossroads for Planet Earth. But if you can read the red print underneath the title, the subtitle is where this gets really interesting. I'll highlight it for you. It's a quote. It says, the human race is at a unique turning point, and then it asks us a question. It says, will we choose? Will we choose to create the best of all possible worlds from our evolutionary point in history, from our turning point? Now, this is a big deal because this is the scientific community acknowledging that you and I have the ability, we have the opportunity to direct, not manipulate, not control, but we have an opportunity to direct the outcome of our unique time in history. Now, the introduction for this whole special issue, this is the introduction right here. It was written by a biologist from Harvard University, E.O. Wilson, and I wanted to share with you a quote from him. I think it's so beautiful, again, because it was written in 2005. He said, and this is a quote, we are entering what he calls the bottleneck in time. The great visual from that. The bottleneck in time, he said, when our resources and our ability to solve our problems are going to be pushed to the limits. That was in 2005. You feel like maybe we're at that point now? Our resources and our ability to create peace in our world and find ways to work together to solve the problems that we're looking at right now are pushed to the limits. Well, I just put this piece of information I put in just the night before last, and I shared it with the audience yesterday because I meet people all the time when we come to these conferences. People that say, I see people at the conferences, and I know them, or I know their spouses, and I say, well, where's your husband, or where's your wife? And they say to me, well, my husband or wife isn't into this kind of stuff, isn't into this thing. And I say, well, that's interesting, because from my perspective, everything we're doing in our lives is about this thing. There's nothing that we could talk about in our lives that is not touched by the change that we're experiencing in our world. Our government believes this. And although they don't acknowledge the 2012 window per se, I want you to see this. In 2007, the DOD released a special report, and they acknowledged the climate change piece of 2012. And they're now calling this a national security threat. This was a special paper that was released by the CNA Corporation for the Department of Defense. And what they're saying is this, that when the climate changes, as it does at the end of these world age cycles, that we have reduced access to fresh water. That's a big problem. Our impaired food production. I don't know if you know this or not, but if you all go to the store, we're still getting our food, but if you looked at where your food's coming from, we're not growing food in this country the way we used to. We don't have the ability to do it anymore. It's leaving a huge carbon footprint being brought in from all over the world. The inability to grow food is a national security threat, according to the Department of Defense. The health catastrophes, the spread of diseases, and mass migrations and border control as the weather changes and a lot of people start moving. These are the implications. So the governments of the world recognize that something unique is happening. They don't have the framework of 2012 necessarily to give it meaning, but they know that something unusual is happening. Now, I wanted to share this with you because the outcome of this report was a series of recommendations, and I'm really encouraged by some of the recommendations like this one. This group recommended to the Pentagon and the DOD that the United States should commit to global partnerships, working together in cooperation to build the capacity and resilience to better manage climate impacts. Aren't you encouraged when you see that? Those kinds of recommendations coming at a high level. It means we've got to stop what we've been doing in the past and start working together to get through this time in history. Well, all of the experts are acknowledging these changes. Of course, climate change was the first thing that really caught people's attention. There are over 30 new diseases that have no medical cure today that have cropped up in the last 25 years. So they acknowledge these. The growing food and water shortages we just talked about. The growing number of military conflicts. And if you're not following this right now, I want to tell you that within the next 90 days, 90 to 120 days, something is going to be happening in our world that may forever change our world and the way we think about our world. Are you all watching what's happening between Israel and Iran in the Middle East? Our media isn't picking this up as much everywhere. We were in Australia, we were all through Europe, and everyone is talking about this. If you aren't aware of what's happening, you know that Iran's developing nuclear capabilities. And they've said that they would like to use those to eliminate the state of Israel. Israel has given the United Nations till the end of this year, that means next month, to solve this diplomatically. If they don't, Israel said they have to take military action, which they know they cannot do on their own. Now, if you think about the geopolitics, this gets really messy really fast. Because Russia, China, many of the Eastern Bloc countries have to side with the Iranian side because of economic ties. Western Europe, the United States, have to side with Israel because of economic and cultural ties. And all of a sudden, you've got a global conflict over something that happened in a little localized area. It's one thing that never need happen, but it is the one thing, it's like the elephant in the room nobody's talking about. Everybody's got their eye on it. If that war breaks out, it's going to change the way, it's going to change economics, food, that's the way we travel in the world, all of that is going to change. But this is the beauty of knowing about these things. Of all of the crises that come at the end of a great world age, and again, we're going to look at the past and see what they were, military conflicts are the one that we have total control over. Those wars never need happen. And that great conflict in the Middle East that so many people are focused on, it doesn't need to happen. And I'm going to share with you ways that we can inject heart-based emotions of peace into the fields of energy that connect all the hearts on this planet, tipping the scales of peace and life and balance. We're going to talk about that before we get through the end of this today. But the experts acknowledged all these, the growing threat of nuclear proliferation. In 2005, they said the economy is going to crash. They knew it, they just didn't tell us. And it did a couple of years later. All of these things are global extremes. And I know a lot of people that say, well, I stopped watching television or I don't read the newspaper anymore. But that doesn't mean we're not affected, because when the world changes, global extremes, they lead to human extremes. And these human extremes become personal extremes in our lives. I know that probably doesn't apply to anybody in here, does it? Probably nobody in this room personally, or you probably don't even know anybody that's having a crisis in their life, a health crisis or an economic crisis or a relationship crisis right now. But if you did, this would help to understand why these things are happening. It's all within the context of a changing world. I was trained as a scientist for the bulk of my adult life. And as a scientist, when I see so many crises happening in a little window of time, my question is why? Don't you wonder about that? Doesn't that make you wonder why? Okay, so I need you to ask me a question. Before I go to the next slide, say, Greg, why are all these things happening right now? I'm really happy that you asked me that question, because the next slide makes more sense if you do. They're happening now because of cycles of time. And these are cycles of time that probably, unless you were really fortunate as a young person, nobody told you about the cycles. Nobody told me. Our culture does not allow for cyclic experiences. We're taught that we live in a linear world, that civilization began with some primitive huts 5,000 years ago, and now we've got steel and glass skyscrapers. That's what we're teaching in school. What we now know, and you're going to see this in just a few moments, is that's not the history of all civilization, that's the history of this cycle. There was a cycle before that, and a civilization before that. It's all about cycles of time, global cycles that change the way we live our lives, personal cycles that crop up again and again. Now, this is a 90-minute keynote, and I cannot really do justice to all of this material, but I want to say to you now, personal cycles. If you're with me for a full-day program tomorrow, we're going to talk about personal cycles. Cycles of hurt, loss, betrayal, success, joy, abundance. If you can pinpoint in your life the first time you had any of those experiences, you have just pinpointed the anchor, the trigger for the cycles of hurt, loss, suffering, joy, abundance, success that will continue throughout your life until something changes those cycles, because they follow natural rhythms, as well as the same things happening for our world, the cosmic cycles. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to talk about the science of the global cycles, because that's what this 2012 thing is really all about. The science of the cycles. The cycles that trigger the change are actually triggered by Earth's location in space. First discovery, number one, this was published in the very prestigious journal Nature, volume 434 in October of 2004. This is peer-reviewed science telling us that there's a powerful field of energy, it's a magnetic field, at the center of our Milky Way galaxy that has profound effects upon life here on Earth. It's an invisible field of energy that changes life on Earth. If you're a scientist in the room, they say that biodiversity is triggered by these fields. So it might not sound like a big deal to you. This is the scientific community saying an invisible source of energy that we can't see is changing the way we live life on Earth. But here's where it gets interesting. Discovery number 2, it says that where we are in space determines how we experience the change. When we're closer to this source of energy, it's more profound. When we're further away, it's less. And this was also published in the journal Nature, volume 441 in May of 2006. Where we are in space determines how we're influenced by these fields. Well, this is important because this is now the Western scientific community acknowledging what our indigenous ancestors have told us for a very, very long time. And it all seems to center around a movement that's called the Big Wobble. Are there any astrologers here in the room? If you are, you know about this. It's something that's called the precession of the equinoxes. But if you've never heard about the precession, I'm going to just mention this quickly, and it's going to allow us to move on into the other material. Cycles of time. Some cycles we're aware of. We all know about the cycle of time where Earth spins and creates day and night. That's a 24-hour cycle. There's another cycle where while Earth is spinning, it tilts back and forth to create the seasons. And we know that. We're going into the winter. Okay, now by popular demand, I did this yesterday, and it became a dance on the stage. So I'll see if I can do this again. So we've got the 24-hour spin, and we've got the wobble the tilt while we're spinning. And while all this is happening, there is a wobble like this that's going on. It could be a new dance craze. It could. It's a long, slow wobble. And I've got a little animation to help you see what it looks like. So if you can kind of imagine standing one place on Earth while this long, slow wobble is happening. And when you look into space, the scenery changes at night. The stars change over time. This is what causes the zodiac seasons. The age of Cancer, the age of Pisces, the age of Aquarius are all triggered by where we are on this wobble. But it's a long, slow wobble. No one who was living at the beginning of the wobble is probably still alive today because the wobble takes about 26,000 years. I told you it was a really long, slow wobble. This is key in understanding 2012. Now, our ancestors, our indigenous ancestors, excuse me, somehow, before they had computers and satellites and GPS, they knew this. We didn't know it until the 20th century. But somehow they knew it. They knew that 26,000 years from the time this wobble began, we would go through the cycles that we're going through right now. They also knew that it was a really long time. And so they divided that big wobble into 5 smaller cycles. And these are the cycles you're probably familiar with. Each cycle is called one great world age. And each great world age lasts 5,125 years. We are now living the last 2 years of a 5,125-year-long cycle. However, what makes this one so unique is that this is the 5th and last cycle of that 26,000-year cycle. So not only are we living the end of a 5,000-year cycle, we're living the end of the last of 5 5,000-year cycles before we begin the next one. And that is what the indigenous people have been talking about for a very, very long time. We know there have been at least 4 world age cycles in the past. This is an Aztec calendar. Many of you have seen this regarding the 2012 conversations. This is not the Mayan calendar because there is no single artifact that is a Mayan calendar. So archaeologists represent the Mayan calendar by using the Aztec calendar that has elements of the Mayan calendar. And what we see from this, can you see from where you are, see those 4 boxes? Each of those 4 boxes represents one of the world ages in the past. So there have been 4 world ages in the past, each represented by those boxes. We are living the 5th world age, which is represented by the glyph staring right at you in the center. The 5th and the last world age, about to move into the 6th world age. So it's not just any old world age. It's the last of the cycle of 26,000 years. So it has been 26,000 years since Earth has been positioned in space precisely the way that we're experiencing, and the changes on Earth, the way that we're experiencing it right now. Now, indigenous traditions have understood this, and many of them live close to the Earth, so they use Earth-based signs to talk about the change. What I mean by that is they'll say, when a white buffalo is born in the plains of North America, it's time for the change. Well, that makes a scientist crazy. Or when the rains stop in August and you can no longer grow crops in their season. That's not scientific. It works for them, but it's not scientific. Our culture is drawn to the Mayan traditions because they use numbers, and we like numbers. The Mayans the Mayan scientists, priests, thought a lot like we think. And what they did from their observatories, they calculated precisely where we are in these cycles. And they used a unit of time called a baktun, a B-A-K-T-U-N. One baktun is exactly 144,000 days. And that's an interesting number. It comes up in biblical traditions. It comes up in the mystical traditions a lot. One baktun, 144,000 days. What the Mayans said was at the end of 13 baktuns, we would reach the end of this world age and the beginning of the new one. So we can do the math. 13 baktuns is one world age. 13 times 144,000 days equals 1,872,000 days. They knew 1,872,000 days ago that 1,872,000 days later we would reach the end of this cycle and the beginning of the next. And this is how they knew any time in the last 1,872,000 days, we could calculate exactly how many days were left until the end of our world age. We've been on a countdown. And they knew this because the observatories showed them where Earth was in the heavens. And it just happens that 1,872,000 days from the beginning of this world age ends with the winter solstice. Exactly the day of the winter solstice in 2012. So, the present world age didn't begin at some nebulous time in history. It began on August 11th, 3114 BC. This is the biblical era. 3,000 years before Christ, 5,000 years ago. And this is, if you're taking notes, this is based on the 1928 GMT conversions. We talk about this in the book. That's where the date comes from.
My name is Liz Dawn, and I'm with Celebrate Your Life Events. And the presentation that you've been listening to was recorded live at one of our Celebrate Your Life conferences. And this program was created exclusively for Evan's audience. And I'm super thrilled to share this information with you. So come check us out. Take a look at all of our retreats and programs and conferences that we have to offer. Click the link below, and hopefully I'll see you in person. All right, now let's get back to the presentation.
Our world age began August 11, 3114 BC. It ends 1,872,000 days later. This is your test. When does it end? Exactly. December 21st of the year 2012. It's not the end of the world. It's the end of a great world age and the beginning of the next. I know I'm moving quickly. Does this help to understand the 2012, the phenomenon of 2012? We're going to get into some really cool stuff in a minute. Even cooler. Except I know now that cool is no longer the word, because we don't have any children of our own, but we've been informed that the word is sweet. So, you know that word, don't you? So we're going to get into some things that are really sweet. Okay. December 21st, 2012. The winter solstice on that day marks the end of this great world age cycle and the beginning of the next. I mentioned that as we began our program, we're living this time of extremes, and I asked the question why. We now have the vocabulary to answer that question. Why now? Because we're living the end of a 5,000-year world age, which happens to coincide with the last years of a 26,000-year wobble that happens to align us with this powerful source of energy at the center of the Milky Way galaxy. Other than that, there is not a thing out of the ordinary going on in planet Earth. I wouldn't give it a second thought. But if anybody asked you, what's different now, you can tell them. You can get really excited. You can tell them we're living the end of a 5,000-year world age that's the fifth of 5,000-year world ages that coincides with the end of that 26,000-year wobble. So does that help to understand the physics, the phenomenon of what the world age is all about? I want to tell you there is no scientific evidence to support the scary, frightening things that are being portrayed by the media specials or the movies on television. And I will say that our ancestors told us, and our own astronomers tell us, that this alignment is something that happens over a period of time. It doesn't happen on a day. You can't have an alignment like this on a day. The last stage of this alignment began around 1980 and ends around 2016. 1980 to 2016 is the 2012 window of alignment. We're over halfway through that window. We're well into the changes. We're already living the changes that many people are waiting for and anticipating and expecting and preparing for. We're already living them. And I think that's useful to know rather than waiting for some bad things to happen down the road that we're already experiencing. And I think we're dealing with them pretty well. And there's a lot of good things happening in the world, really beautiful things happening in the world. So I wanted to say that about this 2012 window of time, because our ancestors have been telling us in the language of their day that this time was coming. They warned us. Our spiritual traditions, many of them were birthed during the biblical era at the end of the last world age to help people deal with the change. Inner experiences to deal with the change in the outer world. All right, so what does it all mean for us? That's what we really want to know. Now that we understand a little bit about what the cycle is, what does it mean? What I realized was I've spent the bulk of my adult life doing my very best to understand what this great world age is all about. We know that there is a lineage of wisdom that links our modern world with the past. And that at least twice in history, the chain of knowledge has been broken. And each time that chain is broken, we lose information about ourselves. So we know with the burning of the Great Library in Alexandria, for example, 4th century BC, over 532,000 documents were lost in that fire. Many of them were already ancient then. So we lost information about the way we think about ourselves. In the 4th century AD, our modern Western Bible was edited, and 45 books were either removed or edited. Some of them were completely removed. We know that because we found them in the Dead Sea Scrolls and in the Nag Hammadi Library and the Coptic and the Gnostic libraries. Those two places, when the chain of knowledge was broken, we began to think differently about ourselves. My thinking as a scientist was if I could go to the places least disturbed by the modern world, we would have clearer understandings of what was lost when those chains of knowledge were broken and maybe what we've forgotten. So the bulk of my adult life has been about that search, and what I realized was that it's documented by the length of my hair over the years throughout the search, and then it gets really scary, the color of my hair over the years. So this is Gregg in Egypt back in the 80s looking for information about that knowledge in Egypt. Egypt later in the 90s, and in parts of Peru and parts of Bolivia and Lake Titicaca and then the Tibetan Plateau. And you get the idea. It's an ongoing search, and it continues today. I'm sharing with you what we have come to understand so far. And my journey has taken me some of the most amazing places, honest to God, some of the most magnificent, beautiful, isolated, remote, pristine places in the world today, these magnificent monasteries and very humble mud brick monasteries in the deserts and the mountains of Egypt. And I've had the opportunity to read some of the texts from our ancestors firsthand. I just have to ask, how many in this room believe in past lives? Oh, wow, the whole room is a past life room. So if you believe in past lives and we talk about our ancestors, who maybe we are talking about? Who maybe we are talking about? That's good language, isn't it? Is it possible that a long time ago we went through a great world age and we left things for ourselves from that time that we might recognize now, so that when we reach the same point now, we don't make the same mistakes now? Do you think that's possible? I think it's very possible. I've always wondered about that. I'm going to be off on a tangent here. You ever wonder, like when you go to a museum and you look like, if you go to the Cairo Museum and you look at the mummy case, what if you're looking at you? Have you ever wondered about that? Or I wondered the first time I went. I said, wow, it's like me. Better hair. Or what if you go to a great art museum and you see pieces of art? Or what if you go into an ancient library? Is it possible that we see things that we have written or left for ourselves a long time ago that would trigger a continuity of memory? I've had the opportunity to see these texts firsthand and to meet with some of the most amazing people. And this is where I have to really watch myself on this program, because every image is a story. And I really want to share the stories with you. We can't because of time, but These are sadhus in northern India and Nepal. They spend their lives, they've dedicated their lives to understanding a way of knowing that much of the world is forgotten and bringing that to bear upon the way we see ourselves today. Tantric masters in northern India and Nepal. These are amazing, amazing people that understand the inner nature of the human body in ways that modern science is only beginning to understand. Isn't that a beautiful woman? So this is a story I have to share, because it'll just stay right here with me if I don't. In 2005, I had a group, we were going through Tibet, and we reached a high mountain pass. It was a 16,500-foot pass in the Himalayas. And when we stopped, we got out, this woman walked out of a tent, and she walked right up to us. And the first thing she asked, she says, "What are you guys doing here?" Because they don't get much company there. And I told her we were on a spiritual pilgrimage. And I took this picture of her, as she began to tell us a story. She said, "Do you know how special this time in the history of the earth is?" And I said, "No, tell me." And this is right where she began to tell the story. Look how beautiful and clear her eyes are. She said her ancestors told her that when they walked to the bottom of this valley and they stood on a rock and reached their hand up to touch the glacier, and they could no longer touch the glacier, that it was time for the change. And we were there in 2005, the year that global warming melted the glacier and it had receded. So they were moving their yak herds to a lower valley. Now that's not scientific, but their culture allows for the change and gave them signs and signals to watch for the change. Where's ours in our culture? Nobody did that for us. It's absolutely amazing. This man right here, this is a shaman that we work with in the Andes in southern Peru, the man in the center. In his tradition, at the end of this beautiful valley, at the top of this temple complex, right about there are a series of stones that his ancestors erected to acknowledge the cycles of time, where we are and where we expect to go. And this is worth looking at. I want to share this with you. These are 6 vertical stones. The stones aren't even from this mountain. They weigh about 70 tons apiece. How they got there is a whole story unto themselves. It's poorly understood, if at all. But what I want you to see is this. Okay, there have been 4 previous world ages. We're in the 5th, about to move into the 6th. Look at this. Here is one of our world ages. There's the 2nd. There's the 3rd. There's the 4th. Here's the one we're living in now. And the great news, they knew it's not the end of the world because there is another world age. But look at this. This is what I want to share with you. What do you see that's different about this stone? Those 2 steps on top? What they say, the Andean shaman tell us that the next world is a better world. Those are 2 steps up to a better world that we're moving into. Just the way the Christian traditions tell us we have the potential to move into 1,000 years of peace. Or the other traditions tell us that the new world coming is a golden age. The key is to get through the window of transition that gets us there. That's our job. That's this generation. The way we think about ourselves and our relationship to the world and the way we solve our problems. The good news is they know that a 6th world age is coming. It's not the end of the world for them. I wanted to share this with you. We get information from researchers all over the world. I'm like a clearinghouse for this stuff. And I took this out and then I put it back in before I did the program yesterday morning. In the Hebrew traditions, it is taught that we should not attempt to predict or calculate the last of this cycle of time. Because if we know when it is, they say it changes the way we live our lives. They say it's better not to know. Until December of last year, when some rabbis in Jerusalem came public and said, we're so close to the end of the world age, now we need to know. We need to know when it is, and they released that date. It was based on a series of signs that began in 1948 with the building of the new country of Israel. What they say now is that these historic signs predict the last day for what they call redemption in this cycle. It was made public in the fall of 2009. If you know Jewish calendar, it's the 8th day of Tevet in the year 5772. 5772 is the number of years that passed since, in the Hebrew tradition, from the beginning of the garden, of this cycle. In the Gregorian calendar, that translates to January 3rd of the year 2012. Isn't that interesting that it's the early part of the year where the alignment comes in the later part of the year, but they're both talking about the same year? I wanted to share that with you. Many indigenous traditions also recognize the uniqueness of our time, and right in our own backyard here in northern Arizona are some of the clearest. Now, if you're with me tomorrow for a full day, we're going to go into this in a lot more detail. The Hopi prophecy is so beautiful, it's so complete, it's so eloquent, because it gives us a way of life as well as signs to know where we are in the cycle. The Hopi prophecy comes in two parts. The first part is literally a map of life that we'll describe in detail tomorrow. More detail than I have in any other programs. Today, what I want to share with you are the 9 signs of the Hopi prophecy that tell us where we are in that map of life. And I didn't do this yesterday, so if you were with me yesterday, I got home last night, or home. I went back to my hotel room, which is home for a couple of days, and I really wanted to share these with you. So you okay if we run through these quickly, the 9 signs from the Hopi? So what the Hopi say, they recognize there is a map on this rock, on the third mesa here in northern Arizona. It's on their reservation. It's not available to the public. This is Grandfather Martin, the eldest elder of the Hopi nation, who has described the map, and this is what I'll be sharing tomorrow. The 9 signs that tell us where we are in the map begin. It's an oral tradition. The first sign was the appearance of white-skinned people. That's a pretty obvious prophecy. That was the Europeans coming into the native lands. That, I think, was a pretty easy prophecy. They considered this one now fulfilled. The second sign was what they called spinning wheels filled with voices that cover the land. Now, isn't that an interesting prophecy? They consider this fulfilled with the covered wagons and people that they heard talking inside these wagons as they were moving across the prairies. They consider the second prophecy now fulfilled. The third prophecy was the sign of a strange beast. They look like buffalo, except they have really big horns, and they'd never seen these before. They consider this fulfilled with the longhorn steer that came from the Europeans. That is fulfilled. The fourth sign was that the land would become crossed with snakes of iron. Well, you can probably guess what this is. Exactly, I heard everybody say it. The railroad met that prophecy, but it's interesting because these were prophesied by people that didn't know what to call the things they saw in their visions. Isn't that interesting? I think it's fascinating. Fulfilled by the railroad system. The fifth sign is the land crisscrossed with what looked like giant spider webs from the sky. This was considered fulfilled with the telegraph lines and the power lines that were developed in the 1800s. The sixth sign they called rivers of stone that make pictures in the sun. And this is a 20th century phenomenon that is called highway mirage. Have you ever seen a highway mirage? When the sun hits, it looks like this is wet, but it's not. It's the angle of the sun causing pictures in the road. They consider this the development of our highway system in the 20th century. They consider the fulfillment of this prophecy. The seventh prophecy was the sea turning black with many things dying time after time after time. I guess we don't have to think too hard about that one. They consider this fulfilled with the oil spills of the 20th century. The eighth sign, I think, is interesting. It's when many people with long hair like ours, so they say the youth with hair like the native peoples, would live with them on their land and learn their ways of life. And this was considered fulfilled with what is called the hippie movement of the 60s. Don't you miss the 60s? 8-track tape players. Wow. Deep Purple, Smoke on the Water. Okay, don't get me started. Okay, the ninth sign is the last sign. And when this sign is fulfilled, they say that this was the beginning of the last years of this world age. It was a blue star that would appear in the sky. I don't know how many of you remember when this happened. It is considered fulfilled now. There was a comet called Comet 17P Holmes. It appeared in October 24th of 2007. Scientists knew this comet was there. It was barely visible to the naked eye. It was a magnitude 17, which is not very visible at all. In 24 hours, it exploded and went to a magnitude 2. It was the brightest thing in the heavens, brighter than anything else, and it increased by a factor of about 1 million, in 24 hours. And you can still see it today from the Earth if you know where you're looking. From the Hopi perspective, that was 2007, October was the end of that prophecy. So in the spring of 2008, the Hopi went to the United Nations and delivered their message that so many of you have probably seen and heard about, that said to the world, this is the time of our prophecies. You've got to make some choices. I'm paraphrasing. You've got to make some choices. We're reaching the point of no return. But they went to the UN based on the fulfillment of the ninth prophecy. But what I'm sharing with you here, a lot of different ways, and if I left out your favorite indigenous tradition, I apologize. But what I want you to see here is that world traditions allow for the change, other world traditions, but ours doesn't. No one has taught or told or prepared us for this moment in time and where we are in the change. We're kind of on our own. We're on uncharted territory within our culture. This is where I believe it behooves us to look to the past to understand what this time is really all about. What we know is that world age changes always bring global changes. They always bring human changes. The rise and fall of civilization, cycles of war and peace are actually linked to these kinds of changes. So what can we realistically expect for 2012 right now? What we know is that it's a cycle of the past. It's happened before. If we know where to look in the past, we know what to expect when these cycles repeat. This is where, as a geologist, I really enjoy this because we know that the history of the Earth, every year, Earth receives a new layer of ice on the poles that helps us to understand what happened in the past. In that layer of ice are little dust grains and pollen grains, bubbles of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere locked up in the ice. And from that, we have a record of the past. One layer represents 1 year of Earth's history. Well, this is interesting because it was in 1999, the scientists of the Earth, even from countries who weren't getting along well, the scientists all came together in a great act of cooperation. What they did was they drilled to the thickest part of the ice in Antarctica to capture as much of the data as they could that was left. And even the scientists were amazed because when they pulled the ice cores up, they had over 480,000 layers of ice, each layer representing 1 year in the history of the Earth. Now, all of a sudden, we had 480,000 years of the past to compare to now to see if Earth is broken, to see if we're living in an anomalous time in the history of the planet. So what I'd like to share with you is just one very technical little chart here. From this ice, we can determine things like ancient temperatures, whether sea levels were high or low, how strong the energy from the sun was. That's important. The strength of the magnetic field of the Earth. This chart, I think, tells a big part of this story. And there's so much that we could do here, but I'm going to focus on just one piece right here. The line that you see in the red is the energy that from the sun the Earth receives over time. It's not constant. Earth receives the energy from the sun and it ebbs and flows on a rhythmic basis. Here is today. 0 is today. Here is 5,000 years ago. And if you look closely, what you see is there's a little spike right above today, a little spike right above 5,000 years ago. It's the same spike. Now, there are other spikes that are bigger, and there are other factors that I'm not talking about here. But what I want you to see is this. Let's clean this up a little bit. Right there. If you look at those two spikes, can you see them from where you are? If you draw a line straight through them, the energy from the sun that we're receiving today is exactly what it was 5,000 years ago. Here it is so you can see a little bit better. And if we extend this another 5,000 years back, 2 world ages ago, it's the same as it was 10,000 years ago, right here. And if we look back another 5,000 years, 15,000 years, while the magnitude isn't the same phenomenon is happening. There was a little spike right here 15,000 years ago. So every 5,000 years, one of these spikes, and there are other factors I'm not talking about here, in the interest of time, but these spikes are telling a lot of the story. This is how much energy Earth is receiving from the sun in what's called a solar-driven model of change. Now, this is interesting because if we look at the past world age cycles compared to where we are right now, it tells a story. Here's the average. In the past, the average world age magnetic strength is between 5.5 and 10.5 on a scale that scientists use to measure that. Right now, the measurement is at 7.5. We're right where we should be for where we are in this cycle. In the last world age cycles, the average global warming has been a rise between 1 and 2 degrees Celsius. That's exactly where we are right now. Polar ice melts, which is precisely what's happening right now, and there's a sharp increase in the energy from the sun, which is what's happening right now. What this tells us is if we look, if you look at the data 100, 200, 500 years ago, it looks like something is wrong. If you look back at the big picture, what you can see is that we are living a rare moment in a cyclic process. Now, I have to be really careful when I say this because of the politics involved. We definitely need to clean up our act on this planet, I believe. Find green, clean, sustainable ways of living in our world. Did we break the earth Probably not. Did we contribute to the warming? Possibly. We may have, possibly. But the warming has happened in the past when we weren't driving cars and doing the things that we're doing now. So what this says, the bottom line for me, is this, that we appear to be on track for the physical changes. I'm less concerned. Our ancestors got through this. Here's what I'm concerned about, is how we treat one another as we go through the changes. The challenge, how do we deal with the personal and the social and the cultural changes? That is what tells the story, and this is where we have the opportunity. The past, I think, holds the clue. Martha and I were in Peru, June of this year. And when we sent our group home, we stayed another week, and we were given the opportunity to document a new archaeological site that is still being excavated. It is the oldest site in all of the Americas now. It predates the Incan sites. It predates the Mayan sites by 1,500 years. It predates the Aztecs, the Olmecs. It's the oldest advanced civilization known. And I wanted to share this image with you. We were showing these images when we were in Europe, and people said, wow, it looks really desolate. Don't you have any color images? That is a color image. This is what it looks like every day at this place. There is no color. The sky and the earth and the sun and the monuments are all the same color. It is a remote area in northern Peru that is a 66-acre site with 5 massive pyramids all surrounding a central complex. It's a highly advanced civilization that was living here. It's still being excavated. But what I wanted to share with you is this. This is the reconstruction of the central temple complex and where it is right now. And the archaeologist that worked with us, he was frustrated with me because he wanted to tell me all the things they did find, and I wanted to know about all the things that he couldn't answer. Like who built this place, what happened to them, where did they go, how old is it, things like that. So there are a lot of mysteries that are happening here. One, there are no bodies that have been found so far. They don't know where the bodies or the skeletons are. No protective walls around this place. That's very unusual. No written records, at least that we recognize. So the question is, what happened to these people? How could such an advanced civilization suddenly collapse? And this is where looking at cycles of time, I think, really comes in very, very useful. Because they literally, the date that we were walking this temple complex, our guide received a phone call, and it was one of the laboratories that confirmed the dating of this site. You just take a wild guess. This site is exactly 1 world age old. It was now dated at 5,000 years. Now, this is important because when we look at a timeline, in longer programs, I talk more about this. There's a pattern developing. New archaeological evidence now is really messing up the history timelines. When I was in school, your kids are in school right now, we're being taught that civilization began about 5,000 years ago. Before that, it's like this murky, mystical area. What is probably more true is that this cycle of civilization began 5,000 years ago. Before that, there was another cycle. Before that, there was another cycle. The archaeology is beginning to bear that out. 15,000 years ago, 13,000 BC, there is now evidence of an advanced civilization in South America on the high plains of Bolivia, with evidence that war is what brought an end to that civilization. 15,000 years ago, that's 3 world ages ago. 10,000 years ago, there is a growing body of archaeological evidence right on the border between India and Pakistan, in an area called the Rajasthan Plains, of a highly advanced civilization. The streets are laid out on geometric grids. They had hot and cold running water. They had closed sewage systems. They had wires in clay tubes running under the ground. If you got a wire, you assume it's carrying some kind of electricity, but we don't know what. This civilization, archaeologists are certain, was destroyed from war because of the bodies that were found, the way they're all piled up on one end of the city, and the evidence that's there. War brought an end to this great civilization. 5,000 years ago, in northern Peru, there's a civilization that collapsed right on that world age mark. We don't know exactly what caused it yet. And 5,000 years later, we are at the end of our world age. What will we contribute to the pattern? Are we making the same mistakes as they made in the past? And we're answering that question right now. The way that you and I live our lives are the collective answer to this time in history. So our opportunity, what is our opportunity right now? It's whether or not we choose to work together or to fight one another as we go through the changes of the world age. Do we cooperate or do we compete? And it's all about choice. This will probably be the fastest I've ever done this part of the program before. How do we make that choice? This is where my journeys into our indigenous lands and ancestors have really shed light on my understanding of what this is all about. There are choices that we can make in the outer world. There are choices that we can make in our inner world and outer world choices. I'm going to focus right now on the inner choices, the way they've been preserved in these traditions, because it's in monasteries like this in Tibet where I've had the opportunity to experience meeting people like this. And this is the abbot from one of the monasteries who has given us permission to go into some of the lost temples and libraries like the one that I'm going to take you into right now, where the information is preserved that helps us change the way we think about our relationship to the world. It was in this particular monastery. It was an empty monastery that preserves a great library. It's 3 stories tall. It's 12 feet wide. It's 1,500 years old. And we walk past these Buddhas of compassion. And we walk past these amazing scrolls, prayer wheels, into a completely dark room that looked just like that when we walked in. That's my very famous dark room slide. And when the lights came on, what we saw is what you'll see right here was the corner of this magnificent library. This is my hand with a flashlight here. And this is the corner of the room, and we're looking up at the corner. And these are Tibetan books that preserve a teaching and a way of knowledge, a way of being. It's been here 1,500 years, and this is what's preserved in the practices of the people. It's in this library where we had the opportunity to meet the people that practice what has been left in this library. And if you could bring all of the information together, my question was, what is it that you would find in here? What's been preserved in these books and in these traditions? And the bottom line, there are 2 principles that sound very much like quantum physics. The first is that everything is connected through what they call a web of energy, number 1. No surprise to us, but it's a wisdom that they have taught now for thousands of years. Number 2 is that heart-based emotion is the language that speaks to this web. Not the mind, but it's the heart. Now, this is interesting because that's the core of our most cherished spiritual traditions, and it's the key to precisely what these indigenous traditions have told us. Look at where Buddha's hands are at the end of this sequence of teachings. This is precisely what they're calling our attention to, is the fact that the human heart is where the action is. The language of the heart is what speaks to this web of energy. Well, our own science now, within the last couple of years, is telling us why this is. If you haven't seen this, I think this may change the way that you feel about so many things you've learned this weekend, because all of these amazing hearts and minds, the speakers and the presenters in here, they're all helping us to see ourselves and think about ourselves in new and empowering ways. What our own science now knows is that the heart, not the mind, is the master organ in the body. Not the brain. The heart forms in your body, in your mother's womb, long before your brain ever does. And when your heart begins to beat, it begins sending a signal to the brain, and that signal tells the brain how to run the rest of your body. Your brain's important, don't get me wrong. It's just our brains are getting the signal from somewhere else. What we now know is that the electrical field of the heart is about 100 times stronger than the electrical field of the brain, and that the magnetic field of the heart is about 5,000 times stronger than the magnetic field of the brain. This is important because we live in a world made of electrical and magnetic fields. It makes perfect sense to me if you want to interact with your world, if you want to heal your body or facilitate a healing in the body of your loved ones, if you want peace in our families or our communities or between nations, it makes perfect sense that we would focus on the heart. And the heart is what allows us this experience. Every moment of every day, there's a signal between your heart and your brain right here. It's a 2-way signal, but your heart is sending a lot more information to your brain than your brain is sending back to the heart. It's all based on what you feel. When this signal is optimum, it's called coherence, and we can actually measure coherence, 0.10 hertz. We'll do this in the workshop tomorrow if you're with me. If you're not with me, what I want to say to you now is this. If you can create the feeling in your heart that generates 0.10 hertz, you are healing your body. And you're creating peace in your family and in your community. This is the way that this is done. And this is the great secret of our ancestors. And this is what they were doing their very best to tell us in the language that we now are beginning to understand. It's appreciation, gratitude, care, compassion. These are the kinds of human emotions that create coherence. And that coherence that we feel in our personal lives is now directly linked to the magnetic fields that connect all life and all beings, all things in this world. When it comes to the magnetic fields of the earth, there is no them and us. There's a we. Every CEO of every corporation, every leader of every nation, when they make the policies of war and peace and cooperation, those policies are the result of what they are experiencing in this field, whether they're aware of it or not. And this is why you are so important, because you have the opportunity to input into the field that those choices are being made from, but it's not done through our words. It's not done through protests in the street. It's done by the way we live our lives and what we become every moment of every day. And this is the essence of these traditions and these teachings. And that's what I wanted to say to you today. Many of the problems that we're finding in our world today, the experts are telling us we're facing a time unlike any other time in recorded human history where the greatest challenges ever posed to civilization are being experienced right now. And what makes this such a powerful time in history is that for the first time, as far as we know, the first time in recorded human history, the decisions and the choices that we make have the power to either ensure our survival or end civilization as we've known it. And we've never had that power before. And we've never had to face those kinds of decisions before. Do you all feel the magnitude of what this time in history is all about? What our lives are all about? It doesn't have to be a sad time, but it certainly is a powerful time. It only seems sad to people who feel powerless and helpless and victims in this world. And my goal by the end of our time here today is to share with you the reasons why 5,000, 6,000, 7,000-year-old traditions told us that we are not victims in this world, either of what happens in our bodies or what happens in the world around us, and how our own science is now coming to the same conclusions. The question is, now that modern science is recognizing that we are directly influencing what happens in our world, scientists are saying, okay, yeah, the influence is there, but what do we do with it? How do we use it? How do we apply it in our lives? And this is so interesting to me because I was trained in the language of science, and I come from the world of science. Science is good. It is a language that describes our universe and our bodies and how we work. Science is good. It's simply a language that describes how the universe works and how we work. But it's a relatively recent language. Science is only about 300 years old. And as good as it is, the best scientists will admit that there are glaring gaps and inconsistencies in what we know in the language of science, on the one hand. On the other hand, there are other languages that have always described the way our universe works in our bodies. They're not scientific, but they've been around a lot longer. Some of them have been around 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 years in the case of the Hindu Vedas. So as a scientist working behind the scenes during the Cold War, a very frightening time in the history of our world, my question was this, was if science and ancient spirituality are the two great ways of knowing in our world, and neither one of them alone can solve the problems, what happens if we marry them together? Doesn't that make sense to you? It makes tremendous sense. What if we marry the wisdom of a 5,000, 6,000, 7,000-year-old tradition with the best science of today into a greater wisdom? Will that help us to find the language to address the challenges of our time today? That was my feeling. My conditioning, however, was that science and spirituality are mutually incompatible. You have to choose one path or the other. I'm going to tell you, nothing could be further from the truth. And where the greatest advances are being made in understanding how the universe works today and how your body works and how your relationships work is when we cross those traditional boundaries between science and spirituality. Honoring both, but crossing the boundary that keeps them separate and marrying them into a greater wisdom, because that's the way we work. Well, what has really, really begun to move this is that the science that our civilization is based upon today is based in two false assumptions. One is the assumption that about 96% of the universe contains empty space, and the other is that our inner experiences of thought, feeling, emotion, and belief have no effect on our outer world. You and I know we're at this conference, so we know that nothing could be further from the truth. But this is a very, very different way for mainstream science and for the majority of the Western world to think about our lives. Fair and balanced news doesn't think about our lives this way. If you watch Fox, CNN, 6 o'clock news, either 6 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock at night. Nothing could be further from the truth. And to even suggest, I was watching, there was an interview with Larry King one night, and many of the authors who you are very familiar with, some are here at this program, were on that interview. And when they even suggested to Larry that we somehow can influence what's happening in Iraq, that we somehow can influence the peace in our world, Larry King was upset. And immediately he cut to a commercial break. And when he came back, you didn't hear from that speaker very much anymore. Mainstream. On the one hand, they're not really at a place where they're accepting us. On the other hand, they're asking for this kind of information. So I'm just going to share. Can I tell you a secret? Okay, just between us and that recording right there. Nobody else will know. PBS is working with us on a special that is called The Science of Peace. LeVar Burton is the one who is fronting this project. He's the one that began, LeVar, Geordi from Star Trek. If you go to our website, you can click on the link, and the trailer is already up. Myself, Dr. Bruce Lipton, Dean Radin from the Institute of Noetic Sciences, John Hagelin, I think William Tiller. It's a little bit different group than what you're going to see here, but what they're asking for is how is it possible that our inner experiences could affect peace in our world? And the fact that mainstream media is asking for that. They've asked for a 1-hour pilot. If the pilot goes well, they want a 13-part series, and each of those 13 parts is based on one of the people's work that's in the film. So we're very excited about this because... Well, thank you. Thank you very much. But what's interesting is we pitched this almost 6 years ago, and they didn't want anything to do with it. And it means that times have changed enough, and there was a willingness and an openness for what's considered mainstream broadcast to explore the possibility that somehow you and I have the ability to influence our bodies and our world in ways that are meaningful, and especially at this time in history. And I think that's a very, very cool thing to be happening. So these are the false assumptions of science. The reason we know they are false is because of the new discoveries. Number one, the discovery of an intelligent field of energy that links everything. It connects everything. And this field, I want to talk about, this field isn't out there somewhere. It's moving through you. It is you right now. You are that field. Every atom in your body, right this minute, and the minute that just passed, and that minute that just passed, every atom in your body in this very instant is emerging anew from this field as long as your agreement in consciousness will allow that to happen. When you dishonor your agreement in consciousness, then the new cannot re-emerge and you begin to deteriorate. And if it happens long enough, you're no longer in this world. The field isn't, when people talk about this field, their arms go like this. There's a field out there somewhere. Well, it is out there, and it's in here. It's everywhere. This intelligent field is where everything comes from. It's a place. It's a pure space where all things begin. It's the blueprint of all possibilities, the template of everything that could ever be, from the lightest of the light, the darkest of the dark, all of your divorces, all of your marriages, all of the children you have, all the children that you never had. All of the peace, all of the war, all of the joy, all the suffering, it exists as a potential in this field. And what we do, and I'm going to share with you from the ancient perspective and the scientific perspective how we do this. But what we do is this. You and I, in our minds, we reach into that field of possibilities because we visualize what it is we choose to have. And for many people, they stop there, and it's not enough. It's not enough. They stop with the visualization. They see it, they do some mantras, they do some affirmations, and nothing happens, and they get frustrated, and they become disillusioned. That's not enough. Once you identify it, once you lock it into place, you've got to give it life. And the way we do that is the great secret that was lost in the Judeo-Christian tradition 1,700 years ago. That's what we're going to go into today, because it is the power of emotion and belief and feeling, and we're going to define these. That is what it is that breathes life into that possibility that makes it real in our world. So that's the review of what we did yesterday. We also shared, I think, for me, I'm a very visual person. My man brain likes pictures, okay? So my man brain liked to see these pictures. This was an image from the Hubble Space Telescope, the visual image looking at the center of the universe, where everything began, those two arrows, and seeing everything, the stars and the galaxies, as separate. And the next image is the same image looking through the eyes of the Chandra Space Observatory, looking and imaging what has believed to be the invisible stuff that connects everything together. And you can see very clearly that things aren't separate, that there's a field of energy. And this is just one wavelength. There are other wavelengths of this field that do the same thing. This field is known by many different names because scientists have yet to agree on one term. It's called the quantum hologram, simply the field, nature's mind. Stephen Hawking calls it the mind of God. Max Planck, father of quantum theory, called it the matrix. We're calling it the divine matrix. And this matrix is what we're going to be, the term that we'll be using today, is this underlying field of energy that provides the container for the entire universe, the bridge between our inner and our outer worlds, and a mirror in our bodies for what's happening on the outside of our bodies. So this is an encapsulation of what we've done in our work, where we were yesterday. If we're going to use this field, we've got to understand how it works. We've got to speak the language it recognizes. And this leads us to what is called the great spiritual mystery. As different as one appears from another, almost universally, the ancient spiritual traditions tell us that there's something that you and I do in our lives that triggers a process inside of our bodies. And when that process begins, it interacts with the forces of creation and affects our physical world. Something that we do in our lives affects our physical world. And you're going to see some examples of that before we leave here today. If you do not understand how this happens, when it does, we call it a miracle. But if you do understand it, it's no longer a miracle, it becomes a technology. If you can create an experience of your body over and over and over again, on demand, consistently, repeatedly, if you can do something in here and create an effect that touches your world out there, man, that's a technology. And to me, that's a very... Okay, we've piloted this program with young people in secondary schools. And I use different languages, different slides. We have a screen. We use butcher paper from the floor to the ceiling, so the whole wall is the screen, and all the images look very real. And when I shared this with them, my language, I said, isn't that cool? I don't have any kids in my life. Cool is not the word that's being used today. So they educated me. They said, well, this is really sweet. So, isn't this really sweet? It's a technology. And I cannot think of a more powerful technology. This rivals anything we could ever build in a machine outside of our bodies. I've worked in the high-tech industry, and I've seen some very sweet technology, but nothing that rivals what we're doing right here. Well, the scientific experiments now are showing precisely the same thing. We looked at some yesterday. It's in the book. I won't do them again today. But what they're saying is that heart-based feeling and emotion changes the DNA inside of our bodies, producing quantum effects that change our physical world. We've said the same thing. And when we do this, we are all participating. We're participating in what happens in our world and our lives. And it's all based on what we believe about our world. So the new discoveries are telling us the power to change our bodies and our world is actually based on something that sounds very non-scientific. It's based on what we call feeling and belief. The feeling and the belief of what is real. So I thought that would be a good place to define feeling and belief. Everybody's talking about it. I sat in on a program yesterday, and then I've heard some other speakers use the terms feeling and belief, but no one's really defined it. And I think it's useful to do that because it means different things to different people. So let's look at an old Sanskrit drawing. This is a page right off an ancient Sanskrit text. You're all familiar with the energy centers, the chakras, that are linked to the endocrine glands in your bodies. So the mineral content of the endocrine gland, the crystalline mineral content, is what's linked to these chakras. What the ancient traditions, in this case the Sanskrit traditions, are telling us is there are 7 of these energy systems. The upper 3, the communication and the imaging centers, are, they say, what are considered to be or associated with what we call thought. So when we think about something, we're using these upper energy centers. What they say, however, is that the lower three energy centers are where emotion comes from, and they say that you and I are capable of only two primary emotions, and that's all. And Mom and I have this conversation with Mom all the time about the difference between feeling and emotion. Mom says, I always thought feeling and emotion were pretty much the same thing. And I did too. I was raised in a very conservative community in the Midwest, and we use them almost interchangeably. But the ancients make a distinction, and it's a powerful distinction. They say that we're capable of only two primary emotions, love and whatever you believe, whatever you think the opposite of love is. Maybe it's love and fear. And when I know this is on the recording now, so I have to be really clear. It'll be out here for 20 years. When you get right down to the deepest teachings, love and fear are two aspects of the same thing. They're very, very closely related, even though they're polarities. They're polarities of the same experience. So what the ancients are saying, in this case the Sanskrit text, they're saying that emotion comes from these lower energy centers, and there are only two primary emotions, love or fear. So we think about something in that field of all possibilities. We capture it in our minds. We visualize it. What it is that we'd like to have, our perfect relationship, perfect health, peace in our world, abundance in the checkbook, whatever it is. And the piece that was left out in many of the teachings, and this is what they're saying, is into that thought we pump, we fuel from these lower creative centers. I used to call them the Michael Jackson centers, but I can't do that anymore because I'd have to go sit in the chair over there if I do. But he always used to do that when he was dancing, so that's why I did it. I was up late. It's okay. And it's just us. So into that thought, we pump our love for what we're thinking, or sometimes subconsciously, our fear for what we're thinking. And when we do, what is the one energy center that's not accounted for? Exactly. It's our heart. And when we do, we create what we call a feeling that is linked with the heart. This is where feeling occurs. Heart-based feeling. Feelings don't happen in your mind. They don't happen in, well, they do happen in the lower centers, but that's a different workshop. It's a whole different program. Okay. That was a bad joke. Okay. When we think about something, and into that something, we fuel it with our love or our fear for that something, we create what we call a feeling. And now we have just defined feeling. It's the union of thought and emotion. Sometimes the emotions that we pump into our feelings are conscious. Sometimes they're unconscious. We do entire programs about how to deal with that. That's not where we are here today. What I'd like for you to see from this is that feeling is based in your heart. And that's going to be really important in just a couple of minutes. Feeling and beliefs are very closely linked. When you believe something, you have a strong feeling about that something, one way or another. Would you agree? Yeah, we usually do. Feelings and beliefs are closely related. So when we have experiences of hate, sadness, joy, compassion, those are not emotions, they're feelings. If we're hating, we're generally thinking about something, and into that thought, we're having a fear. We may not always be conscious of what it is, or our sadness or our joy. These are feelings and beliefs. They're not emotions. Are you okay on that? For some people, it's review. For some people, you've never seen it before. It's going to be important for where we go. Does it make sense? You okay with that? All right. Feeling and belief, the reason that they are so powerful in our lives is because they are a code, literally a code. Feeling and belief is a code that translates those invisible waves of possibility into the stuff our world, our universe, our bodies are made of. Belief literally takes the invisible waves of possibility, collapses, condenses those waves into the particles that become the reality of our world. Does that make sense? If it does, then what it tells you, if it does make sense, it tells you that we are only limited by what we are willing to allow ourselves to believe. By what we're allowing ourselves to visualize and love into this world. So, how does that work? Remember back in the old days, probably when you were in school, when I was in school, and maybe when your kids are in school right now, when we learned about the atom looks something like this. Remember, it looked like a little solar system. It was a thing in the middle with other things that are rotating around it, electrons. This is the nucleus and the electron. Remember that? Well, if you look at the brand new textbooks, those days are long gone. The atoms don't look like this anymore. They don't even talk. Remember, electron, proton, neutron, we thought that was tough. Now they're dealing with gluons and muons and gravitons that may or may not be there, and quarks and leptons. And if you're talking about quarks, listen to the spiritual names of the quarks. There are up quarks, down quarks, truth quarks, beauty quarks, strange quarks. And then there's the opposite of all those. There's an up, an anti-truth, anti-beauty, anti-up, anti-down, anti-strange. I've got a whole story about the 2000 elections and anti-truth and strange quarks that happened at the election machines, but that's in a longer program. They don't look like this anymore. Now they're telling us that the atoms look something like this. They aren't things, they are patterns of energy. The quantum atom. Patterns of energy. Electrical energy and magnetic energy. You've all heard this before. We live in an electromagnetic world. Well, if that's true, this is so important. See, for note takers, I put this up here. I knew it would be early this morning, right? Important. If the atoms that everything is made of are made of electrical and magnetic energy, and you want to change that atom, what does it make sense to do? Change the energy, absolutely. See, you could have written that slide. That's how good the matrix works. We're all in tune here. If you're going to change the atom, you've got to change the energy. Well, let me ask you a question. What organ in your body creates, okay, the atoms are made of electrical and magnetic energy. What organ creates this? And don't answer yet, because I'm stumping you, and I've worked hard to give you 2 clues that I want you to see before you answer this question. I'm going to use these slides. What organ creates the strongest electrical field and the strongest magnetic field in your body? And you're saying, I don't know, right? Okay, well, here's the first clue. The first clue comes from a Buddhist monastery, but don't answer yet, because there's an even better one. The second clue. Okay, so what organ creates the strongest electrical and magnetic fields in your body? This is a powerful, powerful knowing. Now think about this. You have an organ right now in the center of your chest that is the strongest biological magnetic generator and the strongest biological electrical generator in your body, but you don't have to know any of that. All you're invited to do is have a feeling. If you want to know why your feelings are important and why your beliefs are important, what you're about to see is really sweet. Okay, and here's the reason why. Because our heart now is up to 100 times stronger than the brain in terms of the electrical field. So if you're asking me the question, Greg, why aren't thoughts as important as feelings? Somebody asked me that question. I'm glad you asked that question. And this is the answer right here. Thoughts are good. They're important. I'm not discounting it, but I'm saying is they're not the whole story, and that it's much easier to create through your feeling world than through your thinking world. And here's the reason why. Your heart's electrical field is up to 100 times stronger than the brain's electrical field, but look at this. The heart's magnetic field is about 5,000 times stronger than the brain's magnetic field. So you remember the images of Uri Geller back in the old days bending a spoon? When he first started doing it, made it look really tough. Man, he scrunched up his face and his veins were popping in his forehead. And that's our conditioning in our world. It's got to be tough for it to work, right? It's not hard to feel. It's not hard to feel as if that spoon is bending, and that's the secret. That's the key to the whole thing. We talked about that Patrick Swayze movie yesterday, Ghost. Patrick Swayze kicking a can, a physical can, is a ghost. The way he was conditioned to do it in the physical world. He's a ghost. There's nothing physical to him. He's kicking, and his foot moves right through the can. And it's only when another ghost comes along, he says, hey man, it doesn't work like that here anymore. You got to feel it. And when he felt that can moving, he felt himself connecting with the can. That's how easy it is. Children know this. But it's this little, it's just this little subtle shift in perspective, a feeling. And what I've learned in our intensive workshops is many people in our part of the world are not even aware of the difference between when they're thinking and when they're feeling. And if I ask them, I invite them to create a feeling, they're trying to do it with their mind. However, if we go into a Tibetan monastery, monks and nuns, they live in their hearts. And they have to work to create a thought. It's a whole different thing. It's a whole different thing. Does this make sense to you, why this is important? Your heart is much more powerful in terms of electrical and magnetic fields, the stuff our world is made of. Feelings and beliefs produce these heart waves of energy, but they're not limited to our hearts. Look at where they go. They go beyond our bodies. From a quantum perspective, you don't end where your skin or your jacket or your hair is in that chair. From a quantum perspective, if I were looking at you through my quantum lens, oh, there you are. You're just a big sea of energy, all melding together in a really beautiful way. Because that's the way we work. And that's what allows us to touch our world in ways now that we're only beginning to understand. Those heart waves change the cells of our bodies, and that's very well documented in the open literature. What is a little challenging for researchers right now is that those heart waves are changing the atoms of our physical world. They know it happens. So I'm going to acknowledge this. Scientists know that you and I can affect the physical world beyond our bodies through what we're creating inside of our hearts. The question is, to what degree? And that is where the controversy is right now. To what degree are we capable of influencing our physical world? If you read the research papers, there's a lot of controversy. This is where the action is right now. How many are familiar with the author Neville? Anyone have the opportunity to see him when... Well, we got about 7 hands, and that's a lot for an audience this size. He was a brilliant philosopher. He died in 1974. He's from the Indies, and he wrote under the name of Neville. And if you're not familiar with his work, I'm going to invite you to look into it. He wrote a powerful little book. One is called The Power of Awareness. One is called The Law and the Promise. And there's some other ones out there. Each chapter is about a page long, and you read that page and you think about it for a week. It's one of those kinds of books. The Power of Awareness and The Law and the Promise. 1952, Neville was asked why he was writing the books that he was writing. And his response to that question is the reason that we're in here today. Look at what Neville wrote. Neville said he wrote to reveal, this is a quote, our infinite power against which no earthly force is of the slightest significance. Do you believe that it's possible within your body? Do you have a power within you in the chair right now against which no earthly force is of the slightest significance? Do you believe that that's possible? Do you believe you have that? Do you use it? Why not? Because you and I have been conditioned to believe that that power doesn't exist. There's a part of us, there's a part of our ancient memory that clings to that possibility. We want to believe it. And that's why we're so powerfully drawn to the kinds of movies like The Matrix and the old movies back in the Middle Ages where miracles are happening all the time. People are out slaying dragons and falling in love in really cool places and all that. Because we want to believe that those miracles are still possible. But we're conditioned, and that conditioning probably runs deeper than even you and I can even acknowledge, deeper than I can acknowledge right now. I was raised in a relatively conservative community in northern Missouri, the Show Me State. And I was told over and over and over again that in this world we're little more than insignificant specks of dust. And that's about it. And that things just happen. You can be walking down the street living a good life, and all of a sudden some disease drops out of nowhere, and you're gone in 3 weeks. And that was my conditioning. And even though my mind knows that is not the case, there's a part of me subconsciously that heard that so many times. But to some degree, even I still accept that a little bit. But I want to share with you a little bit. Belief. Belief may be the single most powerful force in the universe. If you are capable of imagining anything in your mind and then breathing life into that possibility and feeling it. And when you do that, you're changing the electrical and the magnetic field in your heart and touching the atoms of your physical world to make that happen. Wow, what could be more powerful than that? What could be more powerful than that? What challenge could we not meet? What disease could we not transcend? What war could we not heal? when the general population really, really gets what you and everyone in this conference and myself, what's happening here this weekend, everything changes. It must. When we really get our power. And the beauty is not everyone has to believe or understand the same thing to benefit. And they probably won't. A relatively few number of people will grasp the power and the significance of this language. And it's kind of like the stock market. When a few of the blue chips do well, the whole market can benefit. I don't know where that analogy came from, but it's kind of like, I haven't watched the market for the last couple of days. Belief, the most powerful force in the universe. I want to share with you an example. This is some of the things, I've never shared this in public before. This is from a trip, 1998, a 22-day pilgrimage into the highlands of central China and Tibet. And you've seen some of the images, but this particular portion I've never shared before because it's an ancient example of just how powerful belief really is. This is, we were up above 16,000 feet above sea level. Nothing grows there. It's just you and the earth and the sky and the water and God. Have you ever noticed how whenever prophets and holy people, when they have a revelation, where does it usually come from? Usually someplace up high where there's no diversions, there's no distractions, there's nothing else there, nothing else to do. You might as well, receive a message from God because there's nothing to eat, there's no fish in the water. I mean, nothing's happening. So we were on this road right here, and it was in the spring. They'd had big snows that year. We thought the roads were clear, and they were for most of the trip until we found this. This is a snow slide that is now crossed. Here's our road right here. This is a snow slide that has come across the road. It's an avalanche. Someone has been able to tunnel through to let some traffic past, but we are in a bus that was brought up from the mainland. And this is our translator. No photographs, please, of any of these. This is our translator. He's sizing up the front of the bus to see if it's going to fit through this tunnel. It's not, and this is where the trip became a real adventure. We never saw that bus again. We left our bus, walked through our little avalanche, and picked up the only mode of transportation that we could find on the other side. We were all on a cattle truck. To go down, but that was fun. To go down to this mountainside and the entrance to this cave where a miracle happened about 800 years ago. How many are familiar with the great Tibetan yogi Milarepa? Anyone in here study? Some of you have never heard of Milarepa. Some are very familiar with. I'll just tell you the brief story of Milarepa. And the reason that I'm aware of this, my very first yoga teacher 35 years ago was a Sikh. And we would begin our yoga sessions, and he would share stories of Milarepa's life. Milarepa, 800 years ago, was a powerful yogi and mystic in his own right. And he came from a wealthy family. It's very similar to the story of Buddha. He came from a wealthy family, and so he had all the material wealth, and he also had his psychic abilities. A neighboring village invaded his village and killed his entire family, and he was so enraged that he used his psychic powers to kill at least 35 other people. And when he had done that, he realized that it was a misuse of his power. And from that moment on, his life changed. He left all of his material possessions, all of his wealth behind. He went into a series of caves, and this is one of them. And he never left again. And he stayed through the end of his life to deepen his inner abilities and to honor the gift of life, hoping in some way to compensate for the misuse of his power. The few people that did find him, he had some clothing when he went to this cave. He learned the inner power of psychic heat, so he never had to have clothing for warmth, and his clothing became tattered and shredded. The only thing he ate were the nettles that grow at this elevation around this cave that are rich in chlorophyll. And his hair and his body turned a vibrant green that stayed with him for the rest of his life. And they said if you happened to come up on Milarepa in his cave, it was a frightening sight because his hair was down to his waist, it was green, his body was green, his teeth were kind of yellow-green. He didn't have a lot of clothes on, so it was a pretty scary thing to see. But there were some students that did go and study with him. And one of the things that he was trying to share with them is the power of their belief and that they are not bound by the physicality of this world. And one of the ways that he went about doing that, he lived in the cave. And one of his students said, "Don't you feel confined in this cave?" And I've got a new book coming out in April, and I tell the story in more detail. But briefly, what he said to his student here, he said, this cave provides me shelter. He says, but it doesn't confine me. Here, I'll show you. And he walked over to the wall of the cave, and he put his hand up against the cave. He pushed on that solid wall, the native earth. And to his student, he felt that wall was a boundary, and then Milarepa kept pushing, and his hand went right into that rock. And it happened in a number of places. This is an image of Milarepa on the cave, and pilgrims come by and they place money against the wax. This white is wax that's on the cave wall. And this is an image of Milarepa doing this miracle. And I don't know if this is going to come out very well or not, but this is the place. Here's the altar where it happened. I can see right now. You're not going to be able to see it. It's right there. Oh, you can't even see it on this one. Okay, well, I apologize, but there is a place. And I walked over to this place, and I put my hand. It's about 16 inches deep that he went into the cave wall. And I thought, well, maybe somebody hoaxed it. And when I put my hand in there, it fits so perfectly in that place. I felt in that moment that it couldn't have been hoaxed. And then there are other places in this cave where he did the same with his feet. And the whole point of this is that in his mind, in his belief, the wall was not a boundary. And he embodied that and shared that with his student. When his student saw that happen, his student had to do one of two things. He either had to rearrange his belief system to accommodate what he'd just seen, or he had to walk out of the cave and say, I'm never coming back here again. And this is one of the ways we change our beliefs. We change our beliefs either by being shown the logical reason why something is true or it's not true, and that goes through our mind, logic. Or we're shown a miracle that bypasses our mind and goes right to our heart. And we've seen it with our own eyes, and it forever changes the way we see our world. And hopefully we're going to do both in here today. I apologize, but I thought the image would come out better than that. The question, is that a miracle or is it a technology? Is it a miracle or a technology, the fact that Milarepa was able to put his hand into that wall the way that he did? Well, just how powerful is belief? This is one of the places I promised you that you would have the opportunity to determine where this program goes. So, are you ready for a choice? Was that a miracle or was it a technology? It depends on how you think about your world. Are you open to the possibility of thinking about your world in a really, really very different way? Are you open to maybe stretch? This was 2:30 in the morning. I had a good time with this slide, you know. But seriously, I have to ask you this question because once you say yes, we're going to embark upon a journey, and it's pretty hard to turn back, and I'm going to have to follow it through. And I need your permission, and if you say no, we won't do that. So well, here's the question right here. Do you want the safe reality or the deep reality? Okay, if you want the deep reality... No, I did. We could go either way, but I'm going to show you in just a minute. Okay, well, here's our button. So we gotta press that button. Can we do it? Well, it says access denied. Okay, well, let's see. Maybe we didn't ask the right way. Do we want the safe reality, the deep reality? You chose the deep reality, but maybe what we want is the deep or the really deep reality. Maybe that's it. Do you want the really deep reality? Well, if we press that button, what happens? Well, there it is. Good work. Good work. All right. Got to make it fun. This is a huge concept, and I'm going to go through it quickly. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not doing justice to this concept, and I want to introduce it to you. If you are not aware, what we're about to discuss here, this is the buzz, it's the hot topic, it's the controversy, it's the cool stuff that everybody is talking about at the water cooler, in the back room of the physics departments of the major university, mainstream physicists and scientists. These aren't old guys and girls out on the park bench feeding the pigeons wondering what the next hot topic is going to be. And it's sort of underground because it is so out there, yet it makes so much sense. You ready? Okay, here's the question. This is the question that's being asked. And just work with me through this. The very serious question that physicists are asking is about the nature of our universe and our reality. And it's going to sound like a philosophical question, except it gets very real very quickly. They're asking this question: is the universe that we're living in a virtual reality? Is the universe that we're living in a simulation that has been created for us to have an experience here that we cannot have anywhere else? Sounds like a movie, doesn't it? Where do you think that movie came from? Is the universe really a very ancient virtual reality? Now, we're not talking about who or what or why. I mean, all kinds of questions come up. The question they're asking, is it possible that you and I could be living in a world that's not so real? Let me ask, what have the Aboriginal traditions said to us for about 20,000 years? What do they say about this world? Is this the real world? No, they say it's a dream world. Where's the real world? Somewhere else, right? Christian traditions, what do they say about this world? We're here for a while, but where's the real cool, sweet place to be? Where is it? Hereafter heaven, somewhere else. Native American traditions say the same thing. So this idea is not so bizarre from the perspective of many ancient traditions. Are we living a simulation? Okay, well, my man brain, when I began to see how seriously scientists are taking this, I wanted to see. I mean, I kind of know what a simulation is, but I looked it up. I wanted to see what a simulation is for. Look at this. A simulation. What is the purpose of a simulation? It's to master something that is not known in a safe environment so that you understand how to use that before you get to the place where you really need it. Is it possible that you and I are living a reality here, learning about something, and we'll talk about what that something is? Are we learning something here in a relatively safe environment, given a period of time to do it because we're going to need it somewhere else? Do you think that's a possibility? How does that feel to you? I mean, it's a bizarre concept, but how does it feel? Does it feel like maybe, where have your spiritual and religious traditions said you're going to go when you finish here? Someplace else, right? And when you go there, the rules may be a little bit different. I began to ask the question, if we're here mastering an unknown, maybe how to use the language of the heart to create in a reality. Can you imagine what would happen if every thought, feeling, and emotion you had in every instant became manifest immediately? Wouldn't that be a pretty interesting world? I was reading some statistics. Do you know that for the average male, the average male in Western society has around 1,200 thoughts a day average, and if they're creative, it can go up to 20,000 thoughts a day. About 90% of those are sexual in nature. Can you imagine what would happen if they manifested immediately every time we had one of those? It'd be a pretty wild world. But even if it's not sexual in nature, can you imagine if every passing thought that you had became a reality, how confusing your life and your world would be? Is it possible that we're here learning about the power of thought, feeling, and emotion, isolating the possibilities, choosing what we would like to experience, and learning to breathe life into that, to manifest it in a physical reality, and learn it really well here because we're going to need it when we get someplace else? Do you think that's possible? Maybe. Well, I began to ask the question, if it's true, who would make such a simulation? And the next question is, who would benefit from it? Who would benefit from that? You answer me. Who would benefit? Is it possible that you and I have created the simulation so that we can learn something here that we're going to need somewhere else? You know that you're not even in this room, right? You know that there's a part of you that's somewhere else. You communicate with it all the time, whether you call it a higher self or an over-self or whatever it is. There's a part of you that's outside of this simulation somewhere, whatever it is. How does this concept feel to you? Is it a bizarre concept? Does it make sense? Okay, let's take it a little further. This is a quote from 2006 Templeton Award laureate John Barrow from Oxford University. Quote, he says, it's long been recognized that technological civilizations only a little bit more advanced than ours will have the capacity to simulate entire universes in which entities can emerge and communicate with one another. He's asking the question, has it already happened? Has civilization already advanced to the point where this is happening and we are living in the result of that? Does it sound like we just took a big step out there somewhere? Well, signs of a virtual reality. How would you know? Would you even know if you were in a simulation? Would you know it? I mean, the whole idea, if you step into a flight simulator, the whole idea is it's so real, you feel like you're in the cockpit of a plane, right? Or I worked for Martin Marietta. We put probes on Mars. We built simulations for the Martian surface. In there, it's supposed to be like the real thing. If you didn't know, okay, let's just do it this way. How many Star Trek fans in here? Do you remember the episode? I didn't think I was going to do this, but I will. Do you remember the episode where, and I think this is Second Generation. What is the prime directive of Star Trek Second Generation? They're exploring the universe where nobody's ever been. However, what? They cannot interfere with any of those realities. You remember that? Okay, so they're out checking out a new universe like they always do every week. They find a solar system that's kind of like ours. It's got a sun that's kind of like ours. Lo and behold, there's a planet that's kind of like ours. But that planet never became technological. They were happy agricultural people, very cool, very healthy, very sweet. They had good families. Everything was cool. They had no way of knowing that in about 24 hours, their sun was going to explode into a supernova and microwave everything in the solar system. Okay, so the Enterprise is in a quandary here. Because those are humans, they want to save their lives, but they can't interfere. But not to worry, they come up with a very cool solution. Here's what they do. When everyone on the planet... You want to hear the story? Okay. When everyone on the planet goes to sleep, what they do is they beam everyone on the planet onto the holodeck of the Starship Enterprise, which has been made to look exactly like their planet. So when they wake up, they think they're still on their planet. They don't know that they're now hurtling through space a bajillion miles an hour on a starship. And the whole idea is the starship is going to take them to another place where there's another Earth-like planet that looks so much like theirs. When they go back to sleep, they're going to beam them down. They'll wake up in a safe planet. No one will ever know the difference. Because if all of a sudden the crew just materialized in front of them and they didn't have technology, they would make them into gods. They'd worship them, right? Has that ever happened around here before, do you think? Okay, it's a very, very good episode, and everything is going well. They beam the entire inhabitant population of the planet onto the Starship Enterprise. They're in the holodeck. It looks just like their planet. They wake up in the morning as if they'd had a dream, and they're walking around. Everything looks good. But you know, something always has to go wrong in these programs, right? Okay, the Starship has a power failure, and they can't hold the hologram in place any longer. And all of a sudden it starts to break down. And the people that were in the forest and in the rocks and the trees and the canyons, all of a sudden that hologram dissolves and disappears. And they're looking at fluorescent lights in the Starship Enterprise. And they're looking at all the people behind the scenes in one-piece tight leotards. These guys had never seen before, wondering where everybody came from. And then the whole episode becomes an episode of human sensitivity and honoring. And it's a very powerful, I get emotional when I see it. But I can't help but think maybe something real similar might be going on here. I believe that the world we're in, it's as real as we make it. What our science is showing us is that reality is malleable. It's soft. We can change it. And we change it through something that we are choosing to do inside of our bodies. So whether you're talking about the abundance in your checkbook or the healing of your body or the peace between nations or where we go in 2012 or what happens on 2013, all of that is up for grabs because you and I are choosing it right now. And we're waking up to the fact that we have the power to make those choices. Signs of virtual reality. How would you know? Here's what a virtual reality looks like. I went to a couple of different sites. Virtual realities have a beginning and an end. They start somewhere and they end somewhere. The users have a point where they begin and where they end. There are rules in a virtual reality, in a simulation, and the idea is that as you use them more and more, you get better and better at what you're doing. Like maybe relationships, like maybe feelings and emotions. In a virtual reality, the user is communicating with some form of themselves outside of the virtual reality. And there are choice points within the reality where they can change everything. Now this is how a virtual reality is defined. Does it sound familiar? Except for the context it sounds a lot like what our most cherished and ancient spiritual traditions have always said, in a different language. There's a place where our universe began, whether we call it the Big Bang or in the beginning, somebody created it. It's got an end point, whether you call it the end of days or the last of days or whatever you want. It doesn't mean the world ends, it means the simulation ends. Users have a place where they come in and we leave. We're born and we die, or other things can happen. There are rules, and we call them the rules of physics as we're learning them, how we interact with our reality. We're supposed to get better at this stuff as we go along. We're communicating with something outside of our reality, whether we call it God or a higher self or angels or oversouls or whatever language you want to use. And there are choice points where we can jump from one possibility to another, except for the context. Doesn't it sound a lot like what we've been told for 5,000 years anyway? Maybe we are in a simulation, in a virtual reality. Nick Bostrom from Department of Philosophy, Oxford University, wrote a paper. There's no question what this paper's about. Look at the title. Are you living in a computer simulation? I'm going to save you the whole paper. He goes through some very complex mathematics. He uses those mathematics to come up with 3 possibilities. Only one of those 3 applies to what we're doing right here. And here's that third possibility. Number 3, we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation. The odds are greater that we are in a virtual reality than we're not, based on the mathematics of these papers. I'm going to invite you to check this out. Okay, I see people talking among yourselves, furrowed eyebrows. Are you okay with this? Does it work? Does anybody say, what the hell is he talking about? How do you feel about these things? You okay with this? It's going to be important in just a minute. It's going to be important. Whether it's real or not doesn't make any difference. It's going to be important in just a minute. Look at this. This is a quote. Seth Lloyd, MIT professor of programming. MIT professor. He was author of a book came out last year, Programming the Universe. He says that, quote, the history of the universe is, in effect, a huge and ongoing quantum computation. The universe is a quantum computer. He doesn't say it acts like or it's kind of like. He says it is a quantum computer. All right, if our universe is a virtual reality based in consciousness, in belief, how does it work? Let's go with this just for a minute, and then we're going to come back and do something with it. How does it work? Beliefs are binary. Would you agree with me that we either do or don't believe? You have a belief, it's either yes or no, right? Or it's off or on. When we believe, yes or no, off or on, we're having a feeling in our heart, electrical and magnetic fields that are changing the stuff our world is made of, right? Beliefs are binary. We either believe and create atoms, or we don't believe and there's no atom. Beliefs, binary. Yes, no, here, not there. Atom, no atom. The physical universe, from this perspective, is nothing more and nothing less than the beliefs that are on, and you're going to see an example in just a minute of how quickly you can turn a belief off and the atoms will disappear in response to that. The patterns of what we believe, those fields become the atoms of nature. We don't know if this is true or not. This is being seriously considered by people that you would be amazed to know are considering this. There's a whole workshop in there. The question, are we living a virtual reality? Is it a fact or is it a metaphor? Doesn't make any difference. And here's why. Either way, if it is truly what's happening, if it's not, it's a really good way to start the conversation. If it's a fact or it's a metaphor, here's why I'm even sharing it with you today. If you know the code, either way, fact or metaphor, if you know the code, you choose your own limits. And that's why I'm sharing it with you today. If you know the code of how this physical universe works, then you choose the limits of what's possible and what's not for you in your life. And it's not fairy tale and it's not make-believe, although there are fairy tales about this. It changes everything. It means every one of us has a vote. It means our future right now is up for grabs. I've done some very interesting programs in the last few months. Some of them have been in the D.C. area. You never know who's going to come to a D.C., Arlington, Virginia program. We've had government folks in there, and what they say is, there was a time we believed that somebody had a handle on everything, and something has gone awry. And we're here asking the same questions you all are asking. What's up? What's going on? They're asking the same questions. Something is changing right now. Electronic computers are based in numbers. You all know that. Underneath everything you type in your computer, you've got ones and zeros. They're programmed by numbers. Our consciousness computer is programmed by belief. So you can see the parallel. In an electronic computer, if your program has a glitch, you create something called a software patch. Have you all heard of a patch before? Remember the famous Y2K patch? All the clocks were going to stop at midnight, and they sent out a little piece of software. That was the patch that changed everything. If we're using this as an analogy in our consciousness program, if we're going to fix a glitch in consciousness, maybe we were never meant to come here to live in the fear, in the pain, and the suffering. Do you think that's the reason we're here? I don't either. I think it's a glitch in consciousness. And if it's a glitch and belief is the program, then what's the patch? The patch is to change the way we see our world, the miracle patch. That's where the title of this program. They asked me to come up with a title 6 months ago. I didn't know what I was going to be talking about. So I had to come up with a title for the program that I thought I might be offering at 2 o'clock this morning when I put it all together. So, how do we transcend those limits of belief? Well, the ancient instructions were shared throughout every spiritual tradition of the world, including ours. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, they were lost 1,700 years ago. And I know this is no news to most people in here, that 45 books were either completely edited or they were taken out altogether from what became our Western biblical text. 45 books, 20 were completely edited, another 25 were edited, condensed, and rearranged. We know this because we found those books in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Nag Hammadi Library, in the Coptic libraries of Egypt. We lost them in our culture. Other traditions haven't lost them. And that's, for me, the value. People have asked me, Greg, why go to these places in the world that are so low-tech when we live in this high-tech world? What can we possibly learn from these ancient traditions and ancient cultures? And I said, you know what, we can learn a lot. I was an engineer with security clearance working on the Peacekeeper missile during the Cold War, and I was taking trips to Egypt. And they don't like you going to Egypt a lot when you have a security clearance. They said, well, once is a vacation. How come you're going there time after time after time? Well, this is the reason why, whether we're and I'm showing a lot of these images from Nepal and Tibet, but it's from all over the world, because these people have a wisdom today that we lost, and it mirrors what our own science is saying. These are all holy people that have devoted their lives to the understanding that they can create something in their bodies that changes their world. And it's the way they live their lives. Don't they look like a lot of fun to hang out with? There is a man, this man right here, anytime the ladies on our trip disappear, when we're in Nepal, I never worry, I know where to find them because they're all drawn to this beautiful man right here. He's a fascinating man. But this guy is my favorite. Doesn't he look like a very intense kind of guy? He's covered with cremation ashes, but this next image tells the whole story. Wait till you see this mischievous little grin that he gets on his face. Look at that. Doesn't he look like he knows something that you'd like to know? The reason I'm sharing this with you is you don't have to go to another part of the world. You don't have to live the life of the yogi or an ascetic. Although, this guy chose to. And just to orient you, this is the heels of his feet above his head from this yogi that is sitting here. Look at the intensity of his face. First thing he said was, don't take my picture. I didn't, but somebody else did, so I'm borrowing their picture. The whole idea is you don't have to live this life of extreme to understand and practice what they know. This is the path that they've chosen. But there are other places, like this monastery in Tibet. The only way to get up there is through these horses. I know you all have heard about Tibetan men. You see pictures of the men all the time. Very, very powerful images of the men. You don't often get to see the ladies. And I wanted to see some of the beautiful, beautiful ladies in this part of the world. Do you see one that's really special on here? I talk about her in some of the workshops. How old do you think she is? Tibetans don't track their age, first of all. If you ask them how old they are, the first thing you do is giggle. Because it's not important. But they know what year they were born and they know what year this is. And this lady is well in advance of 120. I'm going to show you a film in a few minutes. The man that took the film died last year at 151 years old. And this isn't unusual in this part of the world. It's not unusual. Because they think about things, and they don't track their age. So every year they don't say, oh, I'm another year older, and their body chemistry doesn't respond to them getting another year older. But look at these beautiful ladies. You don't get to see them very often, and I really want to honor the feminine energy as well as the male energy, in preserving the knowledge and the wisdom that we're sharing. Now, I'm showing different trips. Those were from 2005. This was back in 1998. I'm going to do this quickly. 1998 was the first time we had the opportunity to be in this monastery. My hair was a little darker then. And, okay, a little longer. But it was in this place where we met these beautiful young monks, and they asked if they could chant prayers of peace for us, if they could chant prayers of peace. What are we going to say? No. I said, you bet. And we finished. I always carry a native flute, a cedar flute, and we did prayers of peace back for them. And I saw, look at the look on his face. What do you think he's thinking? He's thinking, sweet flute. I'd love to have one of those. So we did. We gave this to him. He was a very happy man, taught him to play. He was playing this flute in no time. And the whole thing, they did their chants. They want us to chant back. We quickly learned as a group that we didn't know any songs to chant together. And the only song we all knew together was Old MacDonald. Okay, but the words didn't make any sense. So we changed the words. We did a yak, yak here, yak, yak there. They didn't get it at all. It sounded silly to them. But the part that they got, and I'll do my best morning voice here to do this. The part they got was the refrain, because they have this tremendous ear for rhythm. So when we got to the refrain, the part that they really liked was the part that went, E-I-E-I-O. So that little chant traveled faster than we did through Tibet, and they would meet us at the subsequent monasteries chanting E-I-E-I-O before we ever got there. But the reason I'm sharing this is because it opened the camaraderie that led us to the library that you all saw yesterday. And it was in this library where we found these books. And it was in these books where they have records of the things that were lost in our traditions. But the pages look like they would fall apart if you touch them, don't they? And they do. They're almost worthless. But what we know is for every one of these pages, there's a wooden block that was carved to make that page. So they shared that library with us as well. This is a library of the wooden blocks. Each block has the name of the book. See, these are all the same up here. That's the name. This is the chapter. Everyone's different, and this is the page. And they pulled out one of these, and these blocks of wood will last for thousands of years. They're made from a wood called ironwood. So they pull these out, they ink them up, the block, they lay a piece of paper, they roll over that block, and voila, you've got a brand new page from a 1,500-year-old book. I asked them to do this so I could share it with you today. And they're almost the same thing that we find in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Nag Hammadi Library. What do they say? Bottom line, everything's connected through a field. We now know that. Feeling and belief speaks to that field. We know that. But we're just arriving at this understanding. This is their culture. This is where they begin. It's where they've been for 1,500 years. This was the man, the beautiful man that I met in 1998. He's the abbot of this monastery. And it was this man, I asked the question, when we see your prayers for 14 and 16 hours a day, when we see the mudras and the mantras and the bells and the bowls and the gongs and the chimes and the incense, when we see your prayers on the outside, what's happening on the inside? And this is the man, very, very clearly, that said to me, you've never seen our prayers, because a prayer cannot be seen. He said, what you see are the things that we do to create the feeling in our bodies. The feeling is the prayer. The feeling is the prayer. Okay, you tell me, where does feeling occur? And what is the heart? What role does the heart play energetically in your body? It's the strongest what? Electrical and magnetic resonator in your body, generator in your body. If you're feeling in your heart, you're changing electrical and magnetic waves. It's changing the stuff around you. And he's telling us precisely this. The key is to feel from the outcome as if. If you're going to create in that world, you've got to give the field something to work with. Not that you're going to get to the healing or get to the peace. Our conditioning is that these things take a long time, a long, slow, arduous process of beginning to start the process of the path of eventual recovery to whatever it is that we're working for. Quantum physics doesn't work that way. Man, when there's a quantum change, what do we call it? It's a quantum leap. It happens like that. We come from the place it's already done. And this is what they're saying. Feel as if Your prayer is already answered. Your body is already healed. Your perfect relationship is already here. That peace is already present. And when you do that, you'll change the cells of your body and you'll change the atoms of your world. And if we are truly living in a virtual reality, maybe this is what we came here to do. It's a different language. Maybe it's time to update our story. Maybe we've outgrown the 5,000-year-old story. When we're looking at cell phones and computers and the internet, maybe there's no wonder there's a disconnect between that and our ancient spiritual heritage, because maybe we've outgrown the language. The principles are there, same principles, but maybe we need a new language to describe that. Okay, you okay with everything we've done in here so far? Does it make sense? Feeling as if. We're not finished. But I want to make sure that we're good up to this point. What I'd like to do is give you a very potent example. Some of you may have seen this, some have never seen it. If you have seen it, you have a new context within which to look at this. What we've done is we've laid the foundation of possibilities. We've given the academics. If you were with me yesterday, as many of you were, you've seen some of the science. It was early morning. I didn't want to do a lot of the science because at 9:30 last night, I hit the delete button on my computer and redid the whole program. So now what I'd like to do is share something that takes all of that out of the realm of academics. Because if you actually see it applied, if you see a demonstration of what it is we're talking about, then you must do one of two things. You either, in your mind, say, well, the whole thing's a hoax, and I'm going to go to my next program and hope they're not talking about virtual realities. Or you readjust the way you think about yourself and your world to accommodate what it is that you've seen. So this is the first DVD that I'm about to begin the process of start talking about. So I'm asking you to not start it, but to prepare the process to begin to start, because you wanted a heads up for when we go. Okay, that was secret code to our AV guy. The images you're going to see they're not professional images. They were done by hand in a medicineless hospital in Beijing, China. It's a medicineless hospital. It's almost an oxymoron. It is a place unlike anything you see here in the West. I have yet to see one of these here in the West. What is about to happen is, this is one example, but they do this all the time. This isn't a one-shot deal. I don't want you to think it's just a one-time only. There's a woman who's gone to Western medical doctors. They've diagnosed her with an inoperable bladder cancer, and they said, we can't help you. There's nothing we can do. They said, be comfortable to the end of your days. She said, well, thanks for your opinion. I'm going to go someplace else. She now is at a medicineless hospital. She has learned about her body, and she's learned many of the principles that we're talking about right now. She's learned new life-affirming ways to nourish her body, to move her body in gentle life-affirming ways to stimulate the electrical and the magnetic fields in her body. She's learned new ways to believe, new ways to breathe the breath of life, deep life-affirming breaths with her diaphragm out. So I like that when I say that, and I hear people going, I say, oh, good audience, good audience. And at some point, it makes sense to undergo what she is about to undergo. I'm going to answer some of your questions right now. The woman is awake. She's conscious. She believes in the process that is happening. She has prepared her body with life-affirming actions, such as the ones I just described. Through a sonogram, through an ultrasound, we can look at her body while 3 practitioners are doing all the things I just shared. They aren't touching her. They are feeling the feeling as if the woman is already healed. Now, this is powerful. They're not judging her cancer is right or wrong or good or bad. They're saying it's a possibility because everything is possible. They're saying it's one possibility. They're not saying you got to go away or we're going to cut you out or radiate you. They're saying it's one possibility, and now they're saying we know the language to choose a new possibility, and they're feeling the feeling of what it feels like to be in the presence of a woman who is fully healed, already enabled, fully capacitated. It's already happened in real time, in 2 minutes and 40 seconds, on the computer screen of the sonogram. You can see that change mirrored in her body. Her atoms will respond that quickly. And to many people, I've shown this in many medical organizations, they say it's a miracle. It's only a miracle until you understand what happens. And then what is it? It's a technology. But it's not a woo-woo area. There's no really cool music happening and the light doesn't shimmer and there's no, nothing weird rainbows in the room or anything. It's just the way things seem to work. And they do this all the time. And I'm going to let the video go to the end because they'll give themselves an applause. They'll say, good for this woman. They have a 95% success rate after 5 years if people will do what they're trained to do afterward, life-affirming lifestyle. And then they'll say next, and another one comes in. They do this all the time because it's part of their culture and they allow for it. And I'm going to ask for no audio at first. Bring the audio down. They're going to begin a chant. And there's no magic in this chant. The chant is a word that they have agreed upon that reinforces for them the feeling. So it could be any word. So here's the woman. She's awake. She's conscious. There's her little tummy. You want to bring the audio down, please? All the way down. Okay, on the left-hand side is a reference image, freeze frame. The black is the emptiness inside her bladder. There's the lump right there. That's the tumor. Now they're taking a snapshot. A moment in time for reference. The right side, now the image is coming up real time. If you're trained in ultrasound and you think this might be a hoax, look at the floor of the bladder and watch the registration marks and you see they don't change. That's how you know it's not a hoax. Okay, if you go ahead and bring the audio up so you can listen to the chant. And they're saying, wah, sa, wah, sa. It roughly translates into the words already done. It's already happened. It's already healed. Watch the right side of the screen. Watch the right side of the screen. So the left is reference, the right is real time. This is her body right now. Saying, gone, 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 gone. Okay, will you hit pause, please? I'm going to ask our AV, can you hit pause one more time? Let's see if we can toggle the bar. One more time. Uno más, por favor. Well, I guess that's where it is. Okay, well, you get the idea. The tumor's gone. Some of you have seen it, some have never seen it. How do you feel when you see something like that? Is it meaningful to you at all? Do you feel that you have to go halfway around the world to have an experience like this if you wanted to do this? You don't. That's the reason I'm sharing this. You have everything that you need in your body, and you have all the wisdom of how our reality works. All that we are required to do is now have the understanding that allows us to believe in this possibility, to allow it to happen in our lives. Now, I'm sharing this with one woman. This is changing the life of one woman. They're feeling the feeling as if the outcome, whatever it is, has already happened. The same principle I shared yesterday applies for a large geographic area. People that were trained to feel peace during the Israeli-Lebanese war. When they felt peace, all that happened was peace. We've done this with Princeton University on the Global Consciousness Project, and we've seen those little eggs that we saw yesterday that show human consciousness all over the world. We've seen that respond. So it's the same principle, that whether you're talking about personal healing, global peace, personal abundance, your personal relationships, joy in your life, whatever it is, it's the same principle. Okay, go ahead and let this finish, please. Okay, so you can see that tumor is gone, and that was 2 minutes and 40 seconds, real time. But I want you to see what they do next. They give themselves a hand. So how do you feel when you see something like it? Is it meaningful to you at all? Was that a miracle or was it a technology? It's a very powerful internal technology. It's a technology that you were born with, the power to communicate with the stuff your body and this universe is made of. Doesn't it make perfect sense that it would be that way? I mean, honestly, doesn't it? Whether we are living in a simulation, a virtual reality, the real thing, it's irrelevant. If you know the code, you choose the limits. And I think what's happening is that we have placed ourselves in the position where we've created in the world around us the conditions that are forcing us to come to terms with our reality. we must think about our world differently. We must think about our bodies differently, because we're creating conditions that we simply won't survive if we don't do that. And the power to do precisely that is what happens when we ask ourselves, who are we? Who are we? I'll tell you who we are, is that we are reality makers. That's who we are. The key is we can make only what we believe, and the power to do that is a power that truly lives in every single one of us. Every one of us. So as you go to all of the programs and all the wisdom and the brilliant minds and beautiful hearts of all the people who are here today, I'm just so honored to be sharing this conference with every one of them. My prayer is that this offers a bit of a context, kind of a global context, and everything everybody's saying fits in here somewhere, because they're all giving us tools to know how we do these things, how we become in our hearts the things that we choose to experience in our lives. And that's where I'm going to end today. You've all heard this before. The bottom line to all of this is that you don't have to know any of it. The monasteries in Tibet, those monks and nuns, they don't need to know any of this stuff, because they were born accepting it. In our left brain minds, we need a reason to think of things differently. The key is that we must literally become in our hearts the things that we'd like to experience in our world. And in that way, we are those reality makers. That's where I'm going to end. Thank you. I'm going to share some new science. We're going to have the opportunity to go back into Tibet to a different monastery and see different monks, different abbots. We're learning about a language that has no words. It's the nonverbal language of the human heart that has been referenced in a poetic sense for a very long time. But now our own science is telling us that the heart, your heart, from the moment you take your first breath in this world, your heart begins to commune. And I'm going to be really clear about this word. Do you know that the word prayer does not exist in the ancient Jewish, the ancient Christian, or any of the texts prior to 1700 years ago? There is no word prayer. The word prayer is an artifact of human interpretation, human intervention. When you go back into the original texts and you retranslate, whether we're talking about the Sumerian or the Aramaic or the original Hebrew, the word prayer does not exist. Do you know what word they use? It's a beautiful word. Commune. Doesn't it have a different feel than prayer? When we're praying to something or someone or a being or an entity, to me that feels very different than communing, having a communion with the forces of this world. So we're learning about this language that we speak. Every moment of every day, you're having a conversation with the stuff, the literal field of energy that holds this universe together. You're communing with that field right this minute. And the question is, do you know what you're saying? Well, the answer to that is in the world around you. It's in your checkbook. It's what your balance looks like. It's in your relationships, in your workplace, in your intimate relationships, your friends, your family. It's in the success of your heart's desire. All of those things are the field answering the communication and the conversation that you've been sharing for a lifetime. And from the perspective of the ancients, there really isn't a right, wrong, good, or bad. It's just about us recognizing that we're in this feedback loop. There's a feedback mechanism out there, and if we don't like what we're seeing, we're given the tools to change that. And that's really important right now. Really important right now, because we found yesterday, if you were not with us yesterday, a large part of our morning was talking about why it seems that the world is changing so very, very quickly right now. I asked for a show of hands in the room yesterday. There were about 600 people in the room, and almost everybody said, man, it feels like something big is happening. It is. And the experts are telling us that something big is happening. It's not our imagination. And the reason it's happening is because you and I are living this rare convergence of great cycles of time, unlike anything ever seen in 5,000 years of recorded human history. Now, our own scientists within the last couple of years have just begun to understand that where Earth and our solar system is located in an orbit around the center of our great Milky Way galaxy. It's called the Great Central Sun. I know you've heard of that before if you study ancient texts. Where we are in our journey around that source of energy at the center of the Milky Way determines in large part what happens on this planet. It determines things like climate change, weather patterns, whether or not the sea levels are high or low, whether or not the ice caps are frozen or melted, whether or not it snows in North Dakota in July, whether or not we can grow food in Colombia in September. Colombia, South America. I was born in Missouri. It's not Columbia, Missouri, for you Missourians in here. It determines all of those things, but even more than that, it determines great leaps in spiritual growth on this planet. Because when the world changes, you and I have to change to accommodate that change. We've got to change our lives to accommodate whatever's happening on the earth. Well, that's what's happening right now. Why are all these things happening right now? What we found yesterday is that you and I, we're living the end of a 5,000-year-long cycle. If you're taking notes, it's actually 5,125 years. And it's interesting because this cycle happens to coincide with human history as we know it today. So these great cycles of time determine, in large part, what happens on our planet and how we respond. This 5,125-year-long world age is what it's called. Happens to coincide. Everything we know is recorded human history happened in this cycle. Now, our belief systems and our science in the past, they believe this is all there was. They think that the beginning of human history was 5,000 years ago. But what the ancients said is that's just the beginning of this cycle. There was another cycle before that. And there was another cycle before that. And now our archaeologists are beginning to find the evidence that bears that out. Now, I mentioned this yesterday. I'm going to say it right now because this is why you and I are living such a rare, precious moment in the history of this planet. In the cycles of the past, when the world changes, people choose to respond to that change in one of two ways. If they see the world change and the things that are familiar disappearing, they will fight one another, violent competition, to try to keep everything as it was in the way that they're comfortable. And in the last cycle, 5,000 years ago, that is the way human civilization chose to respond. And the war was so bad that nobody won. And they were forgotten for 5,000 years until the archaeologists began to recover the remnants of their civilization. I talk about this in the new book. But there are other cycles where we have chosen, I say we because I asked my audiences yesterday, most people believe we've been here before. You think we've been here before? All right, well, and I think that's what we're all sensing now. Something big is happening. We want to get it right. We want to do it well. There are other civilizations that work together. The cycle that we're living right now, this time of change, what the records show is that it is a very intense period of time, but it's brief. It will only last about this generation. It'll be over in a few years. And then the world will be as it is going to be for the next cycle. But we're the generation that bridges these two ways of being. What do you think the chances are of being on this planet at precisely the time when we end one way of being and begin the next? When we end a 5,125-year-long world age that happens to coincide with the end of another cycle that's about 26,000 years long, that happens to coincide with us crossing the equator that separates the top from the bottom of our Milky Way galaxy. All three cycles are converging right now. So if it feels like a special time in the history of this planet, it is. And these are the reasons why. This is what we did yesterday. We said that these world age changes, they bring changes in the planet, magnetic fields, climate, sea levels, and resources. And when those things change, cycles of war and peace are directly related to this. That's all the big stuff. It comes right down to our everyday lives, the way you and I feel about ourselves, our bodies, our relationship to the world, our relationship to one another. Political cycles, economic cycles, they're all linked to these global cycles. So the crash in the economy, if we knew how to read the cycles, it wouldn't have been a surprise to anyone. Those that know the cycles knew that crash was coming. They didn't know the magnitude, but they knew it was happening. And they knew it was happening the last time because it works in cycles. Our spiritual growth is linked to these cycles, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. Our spiritual growth. We talked yesterday about 3 discoveries that change everything in terms of the way we think of our lives and our world. The first of these is that when I was in school, when you were in school, if your kids are in school right now, the science classes are teaching them that the space between things is empty. That the space between you and me, that there's nothing there. When you look at the nucleus of an atom and that first electron, that the space in between is empty. It's flat out wrong. But we have an entire civilization based on the belief that everything's separate from everything else. And that what happens in one place has no effect on what happens somewhere else. We've built our lives that way. It's wrong. The second discovery is that our inner experiences, your experiences, we're going to work with these before you leave here today. Your inner experiences of thought, feeling, emotion, belief, heart-based thought, feeling, emotion, and belief, speak to the stuff that holds everything together. You communicate with the stuff that holds this world together. And it goes so far, we've even found that human emotion is so powerful that on 9/11, when the world watched the unfolding of what was happening in the United States on that day, our satellites, 222 miles above the surface of the earth, were picking up the changes in human heart fields of the magnetic fields of the earth and relaying that information back to scientists every 30 minutes. And that was the chart you saw yesterday, and we talk about it in the new book. It was the first time scientists said, my God, we really are linked. We really are part of all that is. The satellites in space are picking up the magnetic fields of human hearts. So, I want to begin this morning. My man brain, when I hear things like this, I want to believe that we're all one. I want to believe that everybody's related. I want to believe that those fields are out there, but I need to see it. Because we've all been told that we're one, and we've all been told that we're related. And I've been in so many workshops, I know many of you have as well. People say that. How many workshops you've been in where you go in and the speaker says, you're a powerful being. And you write down, I'm a powerful being. And you know what I'm talking about. Then you are connected to all that is. Okay, I'm connected to all that is. You are one with all beings. You are one with all beings. Take a deep breath. Visualize yourself by a bubbling brook and feel that oneness. And then you get up and go to lunch. And how real is it? So the reason I'm doing what I'm doing, I'll just tell you a little bit. I was born a Cancerian male. Anybody know about Cancerians? Cancerians live in the world of emotion. Well, I'm a double Cancerian. And depending on how you run the charts, I've got 6 planets in the 12th house, and every one of them is in Cancer. So my world is about emotion. That's the only reason I'm saying that to you. And to tame that, my man brain had to learn a way to negotiate those emotions. And what I found for myself, and I think this works for a lot of people, is if we give our left brain, our logical brain, something to work with, once it is quelled and satisfied, it will step out of the way and let us move into our hearts. I work that way, and I think many of you probably do as well. So I'm going to honor the way that I believe we learn, our left brain, our right brain, our hearts. I wanted to see how real this field was. Well, your tax dollars are paying for a satellite. You've probably never even seen the results of what this satellite has found. So I wanted to share this a little bit with you. How many have heard of the Chandra X-ray Observatory? About 6 people. Your tax dollars are paying for this amazing piece of equipment orbiting the Earth called the Chandra X-ray Observatory. I would think that every one of you would have a beautiful hardbound book of all the Chandra images that have been captured over the years. You don't? I do. I'm just going to share one of them with you now. Okay, now this is interesting because scientists believe that the space between things is empty. That's what's been taught. Look at the NASA mission statement for Chandra. To detect invisible fields of energy in, quote, empty space, unquote. So our own scientists are saying maybe it's not so empty. Maybe there's something up there. Okay, so here's what Chandra is doing. First of all, you all heard of the Hubble Space Telescope, right? Okay, this image is from the Hubble Space Telescope. Where these arrows are is the center of the universe, not the Milky Way, but the universe where scientists believe everything began with a Big Bang a long time ago. That's a male-oriented term. It was a male scientist that called the beginning of the entire universe the Big Bang. You know that. His name was Fred Hoyle. It was 1951. I know that because when I asked female scientists, what would you call the beginning of the entire universe? They say, well, we wouldn't call it the Big Bang. They said we'd call it something like the first dawn of the new breath, of the new beginning. But we got a guy out there in 51, and we're looking at the Big Bang, and it happened right here, okay? Okay, so this is what Hubble Space Telescope is seeing with the naked eye. This is what you could see if you had the vantage point of Hubble. There's no special equipment going on here. Okay? And what I'd like for you to see from this is see how these galaxies, they're a little fuzzy around the edges, but they're pretty much separate from one another, aren't they? I mean, this is separate from this. This is separate from this. Okay, now the Chandra telescope is looking at the same place, but it's using special equipment that can see the, quote, empty space and the invisible fields. Now, don't blink because you're going to miss this. So the next image you see is what Chandra sees looking at the center of the universe and see if everything still looks separate from everything else. Isn't that beautiful? I remember when I first saw that, the first thing I thought of it felt to me like a web or a net, which is precisely the way the ancients described the field that holds everything together. The Hopi talk about spider grandmother weaving the web of creation. Or the Hindu traditions talk about the great god Indra wove her web in a faraway abode so that we could have this world. You know, and there are some empty places over here. But if you look through another lens, those places are filled in as well. If you look at a composite, it looks like a big mass of stuff. There's no empty space in the universe. And this applies down to the level of the atom. Everything in the atom is connected. We are all part of this massive, vibrating, pulsating, illuminating field of energy. And we're only learning about what it means for us to communicate with this field. Does it help to see that? You'll think about that a lot. It helped me to see it as well. Okay, I don't like to talk about my material from the stage, but people were asking me yesterday, if you want to know more about the field that connects everything, The Divine Matrix is the book that tells you that. If you want to know about the language that communicates with that field, The Spontaneous Healing of Belief is where that material is. If you want to know about the cycles of time and what it means to us, in March of this next year, this new book will be out, Fractal Time, and that is what that is all about. And that's all I'm going to say about those. But now you don't have to ask me. All right. Thank you. So the key to all of this that we're talking about, how do we relate to our world? We find that key in a non-scientific language in some of our most cherished spiritual and ancient traditions, like this beautiful Tibetan tapestry that is actually called the Heart Sutra from the Mahayana Buddhist traditions. It's about the 1st century. This is a direct quote. A single sentence, you can't get much clearer than this. It says, quote, reality exists only where we create a focus. A focus. You and I are learning how to focus an energy through the way we feel about our world. It's not what we verbalize. It's not what we command. It's the way we feel the world in our heart. That focus is important because it leads to what is called the great spiritual mystery. We began talking about this yesterday. That says that there's a focus we create in consciousness that triggers a process inside of our bodies. It interacts with the forces of creation. It affects our physical world. This is the key. A focus we create in consciousness affects our bodies and our world. When I was an engineer working in the defense industry during the 80s, and I learned this, I said, man, I want to know about that focus. I want to know how to do that. I want to know what that's all about. And it's an ongoing process. How do we go about doing these things? Well, modern science is just now arriving at the understandings where those ancient traditions began. Modern science is just catching up. It's so interesting to me to see how this is working. Because modern science, there actually is an experiment that's going on right now. If you want to look this up on the internet, the very prestigious journal Nature, volume 446, April 2007. I'm saying it in the mic, so now it's on the recording. There's an ongoing experiment. Nature is reporting on where that experiment stands right now. The bottom line, the scientists are asking a question that sounds more like a question out of Philosophy 101 in first year of college. Do we create the world by looking at it? That's the question the scientists are asking. So they have this ongoing experiment. Now, I'm going to save you. I felt that this is probably a bottom line group, right? I felt you this morning. I said, man, these guys want to get to the bottom line of this whole thing. So I'll save you all the details, and I'll just cut to the chase. Do we create the world by looking at it? This journal of Nature says right now, it looks like the answer is yes. They said it's not enough just to allow for us to be connected to one another to account for the results that are being seen in the experiment. Something else is happening. The people in the experiments are actually creating and rearranging the atoms of their physical reality in these experiments. This is going to change everything. This is the stuff that changes everything that's very, very similar to the great secret of our past. Almost every major spiritual tradition has said exactly the same thing. Whether you're talking about the healing of your body, the healing of the bodies of your loved ones, peace at your family dinner table, peace in your community, peace between nations, abundance in your checkbook, success in your careers. As different as all of those sound from one another, they're all part of this same principle, the way we feel and the feelings that we create. This is where we're going to go with this. We're going to go into the Tibetan monasteries in a little while and understand how they do it. And then we're going to do it in this room before we leave. Then we're going to go out and be fruitful and multiply and change the world, because it's a great deluxe one weekend Phoenix Celebrate Your Life 2008 conference. All right. I wanted to share this with you. For those yesterday, we saw a miraculous healing. We saw the video of a cancerous tumor disappear inside the body of a living woman through an ultrasound in less than 3 minutes in response to something that the practitioners were doing. They were having a feeling in their hearts, and her body responded. Many of you saw that. Some of you didn't. So I'm going to share a different kind of healing here today. It's another before and after. But my question was, you all have seen these before. You've seen before and after miraculous things on YouTube and all that. What makes this different, I wouldn't even show this to you, except for one reason. What makes this different is we're going to look at the healing of a woman in the lower part of the screen as a series of still images. And then we're going to go back in the upper part of the screen and look at the brain state of the person doing the healing as it corresponds to what happens in the woman's body. Does that sound like a cool thing to do? Okay, I don't have any young people in my life. When I say cool, I've been corrected lately, and I understand the word is sweet. So does that sound like a sweet thing to do? Actually, there's another word that now supersedes sweet, but I don't like the new word, so I'm going to stay with sweet and cool. To me, this is the value. I said, the healings are cool, but I want to see what's happening in the brain that triggers that experience. Are you okay if we do this? Scientists have discovered that healing and peace between nations, there's a direct relationship here. They happen in the same brain state that we dream in, where we are not attached to the outcome. That's interesting. It's like when we want something to happen, that may be the very thing that stands between us and the fruition of our heart's desire. So, this isn't the clearest image, but I know you're going to be able to see what's happening. This is a scan. It's a thermal scan of a body of a 19-year-old woman. I was just on tour in Japan a couple of months ago. This was done at the Japanese university. What you're looking at, there's a little chart on the side, and I think you can see it. Can you see it in the back by the door? Can you see the colors okay? These colors indicate how much activity, primarily energetic and blood-based activity, the blood carries an energy, and all of those are being measured, are happening in different parts of the body. Red is up at the top. That means it's really cooking. Blue is at the bottom. It means not much is happening. So some places you'd want to see a lot. Like here's the heart. You'd want to see a lot of activity there, you assume. Lungs, brain. But look at this right here. That is the activity from a massive ovarian cyst on a 19-year-old Japanese woman. Okay? So here is how this works. She comes into a room and she's standing on one side of a partition. On the other side of the partition, the healer comes in. They have never met. There is no verbal communication. They don't speak. The healer doesn't know if it's a man, if it's a woman, doesn't know the nationality, doesn't know that there's an ovarian tumor, doesn't know the age. No communication. And here's what happens. At time equals 0, right there, this is when the healer comes in. The healer isn't doing anything but evaluating. You would call it empathing. I'm going to have to ask that you not take pictures because I made a promise that I wouldn't have these duplicated in any way. You can have that one, but if you'd help me keep my promises, this is going to be really important when we go into Tibet. Please help me honor the privacy of our monks and nuns and our friends. You okay with that? Can we do it that way? They said that Mishka said that I could show the images if they weren't recorded. Otherwise, I have to pull them, and it's no fun for the program. So this is the body of the woman. Time equals 0. She's sitting in the room. Okay, the healer comes in and he's evaluating, he's empathing. Now, look at what happens. 3 minutes into the healing, that tumor is going away. 7 minutes into the healing, it's essentially gone. Now, I wouldn't even show that to you because I know you've all seen these things before. But let's look at the brain state. Let's see what the healer is doing. This is so cool. This image on the top, you're looking down on the crown of the healer. Her nose is, and it is a female. It's a female healer, by the way. Her nose is pointed to the top, and the same colors apply in her brain on this chart right over here. So let me ask you the first question. Here is the healer. She's come into the room. She's evaluating. Do you see a differentiation between her left and her right brain? Yes or no? Do you see much of a differentiation? Some say yes, some say no. The answer is no. There's really not much differentiation here. Pretty much, this is a whole brain experience. Let me ask you another question. On this scale from red to blue, is her brain highly active or not very active? Exactly. And this is going to be the point of the whole thing. Whatever it is that's happening within this healer that facilitates a healing in 7 minutes, it's not happening in the brain. And you're going to see this. It tells the whole story. So right now, this healer's brain is relatively inactive, and there's really no differentiation between the left and the right brain. 3 minutes into the healing, let's take a look and see. Now, do you see a differentiation between left and right brain? Now you have a better idea of what I'm asking. Can you see it now? Okay, but what is the differentiation? Which side of the brain is starting to become more active? Is it the left brain? Is it the man brain that likes to tell things how to happen? That engineers our world? No, it's not. Look at this. The right brain's starting to cook up. Right here, it's gone from the blue past into the green, into the yellows. But this is interesting. The left brain is still relatively inactive, and parts of it right here, what color is that right there? White. Where is white on the scale? It's not. Parts of the left brain are becoming off the scale inactive. This is not a left brain process. If there's any doubt, look at this one. Now what's happening? This right brain's cooking, right? And it's correlating with the healing. While this tumor is being healed, look at what's happening in the brain of the healer. Her right brain is cooking, but look at her left brain. It's so inactive, it's off the scale inactive. It doesn't even show up, and then here it is through the finish. Look at this. And this tells the whole story. This is why I'm sharing it with you. I know it's not the clearest image, but I know you get what's going on here. This tells the whole story. I'm going to, your little piece of homework, just for a couple of minutes, if you can remember this image right here. You're going to see it again in just a minute in a different context. Okay, so that's can you kind of remember what the shape of that looks like? Okay. Well, you don't have to tell me now. but you just did. You were right. Okay. This tells the whole story. What is happening in this healing, whatever it is that's occurring, it is a right brain intuitive experience. There's an experience that is happening in the body of the healer. Remember, a focus that we create in consciousness affects our physical world. The healer is creating a focus in consciousness, and now we're looking at her brain to help us understand how it's happening. And it's not happening in the brain. Her brain is triggering another experience in her body that's linked with intuition, with feeling. And that's precisely what you're going to find when we go into this monastery in Tibet. It's exactly what you're going to see. All right. Does that make sense to you? Isn't that interesting? All right. Now, we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to go back and look at those NASA images again. And I think you're going to be really, I hope you're as excited about, even if you're not excited, will you please act like you are so I feel good about what I did, because this is such a very cool correlation that I'm going to share with you here. Okay, NASA has another satellite your tax dollars are paying for, called the COBE or COBE. It's pronounced both ways. How many of you have the beautiful hardbound version of your COBE satellite photographs on your bedstand for light bedtime reading? Okay, 2 of us. So this tax dollars paid for something useful. All right, COBE or COBE is imaging the radiation that's left over from the moment our universe began. So with the Big Bang, there was a release of energy, and there are remnants of that energy still out there. And the science are saying if we can map where that energy is, it gives us an idea of the shape of our universe. Okay, and they're looking at different wavelengths, it's like looking through different glasses, different lenses. Okay, so this is the first image you're going to see are all the wavelengths together. It's the composite wavelength. And this is what our universe looks like right now. This is the entire universe. It looks kind of cool. There's a lot we could talk about here. You know, there are many places in this program where one image we could talk about for the rest of the morning. And this is one of those places, but we're not going to because we're going somewhere. This is a cool image. And you see a little bit of a shape on here, but we're going to look at a different wavelength now. And if there are any numerologists, if you're a scientist or an engineer, this is the 53 gigahertz wavelength. But if you're not, and you don't care about that, if you're a numerologist, 5 and 3 is the number 8. It's God's number. So you can either say we're looking at 53 gigahertz or we're looking at God's number, and you said the same thing. So when we narrow down only to these wavelengths, this is the exact same image looking at only the wavelengths of God's number. And look at what this looks like. Does that look like any kind of a shape that you've ever studied in ancient healing traditions? Anything to do with balance, maybe? What does it look like? Exactly. Does it look anything like that? I'm glad you said yes because I put that image there. If you said no, it wouldn't work at all. Exactly. Our entire universe, when we're looking at this wavelength, happens to assume exactly the pattern of energy that we equate with balance. Now, this is where it gets really, really interesting. Here's the universe in this state of balance that we've come to know. And the next image is where your homework comes in. Have you ever seen this before? What is that? That's the human brain. But it's not the human brain doing just any old thing. What's the human brain doing? It's healing. Our human brain in the state of healing assumes the same pattern of energy as the entire universe in the state of balance that it's in right now. Don't ask me to say that twice. I don't even know where that came from. In other words, it's as if when we bring ourselves into alignment at the highest levels of creation, that alignment then filters down as above, so below. It's a fractal experience, a little experience in our bodies of what is happening in the greater universe. Isn't that beautiful? I've never seen this correlation before, and I almost took it out in the interest of time. And I felt like I just enjoy sharing it with you. I wanted to see it. Okay. So, it's the human brain while it is healing. So my question is, what is the brain responding to? What is the brain of that healer responding to? And this is what brings everything together. The brain is responding to a heart-based experience. You're going to begin seeing this. We're going to work with it. Our heart, we can intentionally, on demand, create a condition in our hearts that send a signal to our brain and align that healing state. The brain's just following the instructions. Our brain's sitting there saying, okay, I'm waiting for you to tell me. What is it you'd like for me to do? And that instruction's coming from our heart. We have grown up in a civilization, in a culture, in a society where we were taught the brain does everything. Because it's a male-oriented society, and men think with their brain, right? There's a whole workshop we could do on that. So what is the brain responding to? Well, the answer to that question is right here. Every moment of every day, there's a conversation between your heart and your brain. It's a two-way conversation. Your heart is sending a signal to your brain. Based on the quality of that signal, your brain is sending chemistry back into your body. The quality of that conversation is called coherence. So we're going to talk about coherence a little bit. You're going to hear this word a lot. If it sounds technical to you, pretty soon it won't, because you'll be so used to hearing it. It's just about a kind of balance. And the optimum coherence for you engineers out there, you can actually measure, is 0.10 cycles per second, 0.10 hertz. It's a very low frequency signal between our hearts and our brains. This is the same signal that communicates with the magnetic fields of the Earth that the satellites pick up. Okay? So, low coherence. When we are in a low coherent state, if you can measure respiration, heart rate, or pulse, it will give you an idea of the coherence between your heart and your brain. We're going to do it in here with someone in just a moment. So respiration. When you see these rough, jagged, irregular readings, heart rate variability, HRV, could you see how they're irregular and rough? Pulse, transit time. These are all signs of low coherence. The conversation between the heart and the brain is this irregular signal, and it happens in the presence of what we would call negative emotions: frustration, anger, jealousy, hate, rage. You all know that. The flip side of that is that these negative emotions, the consequences, is the negative emotions create a lot of experiences in our bodies that we wouldn't necessarily want to have. Over 1,400 biochemical changes happen in your body when you get angry. When somebody cuts you off on the freeway in traffic, they're off having a great day because they made their exit. You're still reeling from the anger you're feeling because somebody just dishonored you on the freeway. You're triggering 1,400 biochemical changes that last throughout the day, bathing you in stress hormones like cortisol, heart rhythm chaos, cognitive shutdown. You don't perform very well. We don't solve problems well in this state, but you already know that. The flip side of that is in high coherence. Can you see how nice and even and regular these are? Appreciation, gratitude, love, compassion, all things that we would consider to be positive emotions. They facilitate really good biochemical changes. The studies are showing that you can have 3 minutes of high coherence and you will trigger a 100% increase in the DHEA levels of your body. That's the anti-aging hormone. That's the precursor to all the other hormones in your body that will last for 6 hours after that 3 minutes. We're going to do it in here today. We all look younger when you walk out of here today. Isn't that great? We'll all be 90 minutes older in time, but we will not have deteriorated in that 90 minutes. That's the key. Heart rhythm coherence is much improved in the presence of high coherence. So these are all the effects. Well, what does that mean? If our heart is so powerful, and it can do all these things, how come it seems like people die between about 70 and 100 years of age? You ever ask yourself that? I ask audiences all the time, why do we die? And first people laugh. They say, well, we die because of old age. Old age is not a disease. That is a catch-all for medical people who don't know what else to say when they're asked that question and they want to sound authoritative. There's nothing wrong with being 600 years old. As a matter of fact, the ancient Essenes said that you and I are living in bodies that should be here 900 years. I'm going to talk about this for just a minute. 900 years. Now, it sounds silly to us, to some. Would you ever want to live here 900 years? Why? Because of what our life has been like up to this point. Think how much you could get done in 900 years. You know, we think about a project in terms of 5 or 10 years. What could you get done in 100 years? Or I like to think of this. What would it mean if we were 900-year bodies and you look another human in the eye and say, honey, I love you. Will you spend the rest of your life with me? 900 years. Some people say yeah, and some people say, God, no. All right, these are facts. Every cell in your body has the ability to reproduce and heal itself, bar none. Even cells that we were told could never do so. Brain cells now are documented as healing and reproducing themselves. Spinal cord tissue that we were told could not do these things. Heart tissue that we were told could not do these things. Every one of you have stem cells in your body right this minute. You don't need to get them from a newborn infant. They're with you from the moment you were born. They actually live right at the point behind your navel. And they're waiting. Your stem cells are waiting for you right now. They're waiting for you to send them the instruction so they can do what they came into this world to do. For some of you, they've been waiting a long time. For some of you, you talk to them every day. The language that allows us to access this is the language of the heart. People say, well, what about the DNA? Well, we've heard that DNA can only replicate so many times and those little telomeres break off. They get brittle and they break off. They can, but you know what? Your body is so brilliant that you have an enzyme that repairs those if it's given the instruction to do it. There's no reason. Our hearts are such amazing organs. But the leading cause of death in adults in the Western world, age over 65, what do you think it is? So it's called heart disease. I began looking at it. I said, well, what is heart disease? I want to know what this is. I found that our heart beats about 100,000 times each day. Mine's beating harder right now because I'm working really hard for you all. Because I love you right now. I'm loving you right now. It's the best way I know how to love you in this room. Our heart pumps about 6 quarts of blood through 12,000 miles of arteries, vessels, and capillaries every 24 hours. I was trained as an engineer, and when you have a piece of equipment that the whole mission depends on, it's called mission critical. If that piece of equipment fails, everything stops. I would call our hearts mission critical. Would you agree? Okay, mission critical equipment, one of two things happen. It's so important when you build it, you either build the piece of equipment and then you build a backup in case it fails, and you build a backup to the backup, or you build the original piece so well that it simply cannot fail, or if it does, it can repair itself. We've only got one heart, so we don't have a backup or a backup to the backup. So that means this heart must be a really good heart that we've got. So, why would it suddenly stop after only 70 to 100 years? A gentleman named James Blumenthal, Duke University, did some studies. And what he found, high blood pressure, vascular plaque, stroke, those are the symptoms that we call heart disease. But what he found was that they actually result from what we call unreconciled long-term fear, frustration, anxiety, disappointment. This is published Journal of Consulting Clinical Psychology, Volume 67, 1999. So it's on your audio. And I looked at all these and I said, those are all symptoms of something else. What is it? What are they really telling us? What the studies found, and this is probably no surprise to you, but I know you're going to feel it the minute I say it. These are all symptoms that fall under the umbrella of hurt. Unreconciled hurt. So I had to ask myself, do we hurt ourselves into death in this world? Is it the hurt that we have from the loss of everything that we cherish, including a way of life that we've always known? Is that really what's happening here? Unresolved hurt. Well, I mentioned to you that the ancient Essenes talk to us about our beliefs. And what they say is this. They say that when our soul hurts from the pain of the things that we lose and are familiar in life, that our pain's transmitted into the body as the spiritual quality of the energy, of the life force that goes into every cell. But the same thing works in reverse. These are from the book, The Spontaneous Healing of Belief. At the back of the book, there are a series of belief codes. That was belief code 20. Belief code 21 says the same principles that allow us to hurt ourselves to death also work in reverse. They allow us to heal ourselves into life. Yesterday, those of you who were with us, you saw two ladies who are documented as being 120 years old right now. And we know there are others out there. And I mentioned that the ancient Essenes, they said that we literally have come to this world. There's no reason for us not to be here for 900 years. But I'm going to tell you, the next thing I say, you're going to laugh when you hear it, but then it'll make a lot of sense. They say that we're in 900-year bodies, but that the first 100 years are the toughest. I told you. They said the first 100 years are the most difficult, and here's the reason why. It's in the first 100 years of a human life that you and I will suffer the hurt and the loss of everything that we cherish. Everything that we know is true, everything that we've come to love and hold dear will leave us in that first 100 years. And what they say is that most humans simply cannot survive the learning curve. That our heart is such a magnificent, powerful organ that 70 to 100 years appears to be how long our heart can hold up to the stress and the pressure of that unresolved hurt before it simply gives out. But they say if you can find a way, can you feel that right now? I'm looking at your faces. I know you feel it. If you can find a way to be with the things that you love in this world, to be with the people and the experiences, the pets, the family, cherish every moment as the present moment, and when those things leave us for whatever reason, if we can find a way to redefine what that leaving means to us, that we have a whole new life in front of us. And this is what the ancients had learned to do. You and I are living at the end of a 5,125-year-long cycle. That's the end of a 25,625-year cycle that happens to be happening at the same time our planet is crossing over the galactic border. Everything that we have ever known and loved and cherished is changing. We're the generation that is bridging all that has ever been with what is yet to be, and we are learning to reconcile this in our lives. Whether we're talking about a planet or we're talking about our daily careers, our daily lives, the same thing. That's why this time is so precious and so special. Well, I think it even goes deeper than that. I suspect it even goes deeper. This is a Greggism. The Essenes don't say this. But you all have heard, and I have as well, that we come from a realm. We're not from around here. If you want to see an alien, look at the person next to you. Nobody's from around here. We're here for a while. We're loving each other. We're going to share some time together. But we come from a realm where we don't have these bodies, and we are in spirit, in family, linked as a unity, as a oneness. And I suspect that the original hurt that we feel from leaving that togetherness and coming into the isolation and the loneliness and the separation of a single human body is probably the hurt that we're all really dealing with. We might not talk about it at the water cooler on Monday morning after the football game at work, but I think that's probably what's happening. And we so long for that connection that we try to recreate that family in this world with partners and friends and siblings and pets and places and things to help us feel those things that we long to experience again. Do you think that's possible? I think it is too. And I think the first step in healing is saying, I think it's possible. So thank you for that. I feel healed already. All right. First 100 years are the hardest. I'm on a 200-year plan. Who's going to be on the 200-year plan? Who do I get to see in this room 200 years from now? We'll make a date. Cool. Okay. All right. Stem cells, wake up. Okay, what we found yesterday is a human heart. How can the human heart have that effect? Here's how. Science are telling us the answer. Right here, the human heart has an electrical field that's about 100 times stronger than the one of the brain. Human heart has a magnetic field that is about 5,000 times stronger than the brain. This is why it's easier to feel your way into the solution, to feel your way into the healing, to feel your way into your heart's desire than to engineer it with your mind. There's sometimes it's good to engineer with our minds. If you're going to build a space shuttle and send some people to another world, you want good engineers and you want them to use their mind and you want them to have good sleep and have a really good day the day they do it. But if we're engineering life, this is quantum heart-based engineering. We're working with a different field here. All right. So coherence, 0.10 cycles per second. How in the world do we do something like that? Well, this is what I wanted to know. And as an engineer, I was trained to look in the world around me for the answers. In 1986, I had my first journey into the highlands of central China and Tibet, looking for the places that had been least disturbed by Western civilization, thinking that maybe there we would have a better idea. I would have a better sense of what we had lost. And if we could find the principles and then bridge them with the best science of today. This is the question I ask. I said, we're living a world that's changing so fast. And there's this judgment about either following the path of science or the path of spirituality. I said, what happens if we marry our two great ways of knowing? Marry the best of our spiritual traditions and the best of our science into a greater wisdom if it's going to help us. How do you feel about it? You think that's the way to go? To honor our past? Well, I think that's exactly what's happening right now. So in Tibet, it's an amazing, beautiful part of the world. It was in this monastery where we met this beautiful little monk. Now, I'm real close to the screen, and you all are on the edge. I don't even know if you can see this. Can you see that he's got a smile on his face? Can you see that? His cheeks are kind of puffed out right there. This beautiful little monk, there's a whole story I could tell you here. In the interest of time, I'm going to have to go fast. But it was this monk, I asked the question I asked every monk, every nun, every opportunity I had. I said, do you have a secret hidden library in this monastery? And after a lot of conversation and some camaraderie and some really bonding experiences together, it was this little monk that said yes. And my next question was, can I see it? I had a group with me. I said, can our group see this library? He said, yes. Wait right here. Well, time means nothing in Tibet. I'm going to tell you that right now. So this little monk, see these keys in his hand? He got on his bicycle and he rode 30 miles in one direction to another monastery to get those keys and 30 miles back while we wait right here. It was worth the wait because now he's taking us into this empty chanting hall. And if you've never seen one of these, they don't heat them in the winter. They're really cold. They say if you're cold, put on more blankets. So you can see the robes are so thick they stand up even when the monks leave. And we know that this is a false wall, and behind this wall there's a library. It's 3 stories tall, 3 stories tall, but it's only 12 feet wide, and it's dark. And they told us that we couldn't use our video cameras. So we went past these 30-foot tall Buddhas of compassion. Went past this hallway that had these beautiful prayer wheels that we rotated every one as we went past, into an absolutely dark room that looked just like that. And I worked hard to get that slide for you. And when the lights came on, what you see next is what we saw when we turned on our flashlights. So this is the first image of this library. And this is, I don't know if you can see, this is my hand with a flashlight right down here. And we're looking at the corner of the room. Okay, so these are the corners, 2 bookshelves, because these are Tibetan books. They've been here 1,500 years. They're loose pages sandwiched between the covers. And I asked my little monk, I said, what's in these books? This is one of those places we could spend the whole morning talking, and I'd love to do it. It's hard not to, actually. I said, what's in these books? And he said, I'd like for you to talk to somebody else to answer that question. So they took us to this monastery down the road to meet with the abbot of the monastery. The abbot is the elder of the monastery. They don't get a lot of company here, so this was a big deal. And all the monks at this particular place, even they don't get to see their abbot sometimes. So they were giving us a private audience. They put on their robes. They were leading us in a very solemn procession up to the place where we were going to meet with this abbot. I had never met this abbot before. I had met the previous abbot who had died unexpectedly. And the man I'm about to meet that you're going to see is the new younger abbot, only in his 80s. And here he is right here. This is a beautiful man right here. So we had to go through the formality of a greeting, and they told me, they said, whatever you do, don't look up, don't look into his eyes. Well, I had to peek. I consciously, I knew I wasn't going to, but it was an automatic thing. But it was okay. He smiled, and it was good. But then they let me ask him some questions. Okay, and I asked him, I was writing the book, The Divine Matrix, when this picture was taken. And I asked him the question, I said, in your tradition, what is the force that holds everything in the universe together? What connects everything? And he went off with a translator, and they had this whole conversation. I could have left that monastery, had a cup of yak butter tea, and come back by the time. They had this whole thing going on. And he came back, and he answered me with one word. I said, what is the force that connects everything in the universe? He said, compassion. And I said, well, wait a minute. Through the translator, I said, is compassion a feeling that we have in our bodies, or is it a force of nature that connects everything in the universe? And he went off and had a conversation with my translator. And he came back and answered me with one word. I thought it was a mistranslation. I asked him to do it again. He came back with the same word. Is compassion a feeling in our bodies or a force in the universe? He said yes. This is a very deep, very powerful teaching. Because this beautiful man at 17,000 feet above sea level, halfway around the world in this old monastery, is telling us, as he has been taught in his tradition for centuries, that you and I are born with the ability to create an experience inside of our body, specifically in our heart, that literally, not metaphorically, literally attunes us to the very stuff that connects everything in this universe. And what we do with it after we get there is up to us. Well, about 5 years earlier, I had met this man. This was the previous abbot of the monastery. This is the man that mysteriously died. We don't know what happened to him. And this was the man that I had asked the first question to when I went there. Isn't he a beautiful man? I asked him, I don't know how old he is. They wouldn't tell us. I asked a number of times and they just giggled. Because time means nothing to Tibetans. So it was this man, I guess 600 maybe, I don't know. It was this man I asked the question. I said, when we see your prayers for 14, 16, 18 hours a day, when we see the mudras and the mantras and the bells and the bowls and the gongs and the chimes and the incense, and we see your prayers on the outside, I said, what are you doing on the inside? When we see a miraculous healing, how did you do that? This is the value of being with a living culture. If you walk into an Egyptian temple, you see some cool hieroglyphs. that somebody made a long time ago, but those people are gone. We can't ask them. And we may not even know how to read those hieroglyphs correctly. But these are living cultures. And you can ask them again and again until either they answer you or they get tired of the conversation and kick you out of the monastery. I said, when we see your prayers on the outside, what's happening on the inside? And this is the man that told me, you've never seen our prayers because a prayer cannot be seen. He said, what you see are the things that we do to create the feeling in our bodies. He said, the feeling is the prayer. Feeling is the prayer. Then he asked how we do it in our culture. And I began to realize that when you and I lost this part of our biblical texts in the 4th century, 1700 years ago, the very books that were edited and removed from our spiritual traditions are the ones that tell us of the power of human emotion and heart-based experience to move this world, to heal our bodies, and to create that peace. And we know that because those texts are now being recovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Nag Hammadi libraries, and the Coptic libraries. Feeling is the prayer. Well, specifically the feelings of appreciation and gratitude. And this is where we're going to go with the whole thing. Appreciation and gratitude. When we experience heart-based feelings of appreciation and gratitude, that is how we create that heart-brain coherence. But your mom knew that. How many of you, when you were children, went to bed and your mom said, before you go to sleep every night, you give thanks for everything in your prayer? Remember that? Some of you? How many? Well, a lot of us may not have known exactly why we were being told to do this, but this is what gratitude and appreciation, in the English language, scientists have found that these two words best approximate the feeling in our heart that creates 0.10 hertz and floods our body with life-giving chemistry from gratitude and appreciation. The key is to feel from the heart as if the outcome already exists. Now, this is important. The healing that happened of the Japanese girl and her tumor, or if you were with us yesterday and you saw 3 practitioners having a feeling and a cancerous tumor disappeared inside the body of a 46-year-old Chinese woman. It's the same feeling. In the early 1980s, 200 people were trained to have the kind of feeling we're talking about. They were stationed throughout the war-torn areas of the Middle East during the Lebanese-Israeli War, the first Israeli-Lebanese War. And when they did what they were trained to do, all that happened was peace in a broad geographic area. Only 200 people. It's a potent language, a very potent language. What is common with all 3? My friend David, those of you who were with me yesterday, the Native American prayer of rain. He didn't pray for rain to happen, because if you say, Great Spirit, please let there be rain, you've just acknowledged the rain's not there. You've just acknowledged the very condition that you're hoping to change. He felt the feeling as if the rain had already come. The healer in the Japanese hospital felt the feeling as if the woman was whole and complete, fully enabled, fully capacitated. The 3 practitioners felt the feeling as if that woman were whole and complete, fully enabled, fully capacitated. They didn't even focus on the tumor. They didn't focus on the tumor, because if you do, you're judging the tumor as right or wrong or good or bad. They held this woman in the feeling of her greatest potential. And this is something you and I can do for one another every minute of every day. Every minute of every day, to the best of our abilities. The woman in the medicineless hospital in China, it's not about making her tumor go away. If she had a cold, it was probably healed. If she had a hangnail, it was probably healed that day. The 19-year-old woman in the Japanese hospital. It wasn't about focusing on healing anything, because the moment you make that judgment, you've just created the energy that may stand between you and your heart's desire. This is a subtle and powerful difference. So please work with me on this. It's the difference between coming from the outcome rather than working toward the outcome. Does that make sense? How many saw the movie Ghost? Patrick Swayze, Demi Moore. Anybody see that movie? Wasn't that a great movie? Okay, what's your favorite scene in the whole movie? Just tell me. Everybody in every country and every audience will tell me the same scene. So just tell me right off. Which one was it? The Potter's Wheel. Wasn't that a hot scene? She's there. Her husband's gone. She's missing him. He's a ghost. He doesn't know how to be a ghost. She's working out her frustrations on a potter's wheel with a nice vase. It has nothing to do with this workshop, but I just have to acknowledge it right off the bat because it's everybody's favorite scene. But there's another scene that has a lot to do with this workshop. If you haven't seen the movie, I don't want to spoil it for you. There's another scene. Patrick Swayze's a ghost, and he's at a train station. Remember, he's at the train station, and he's on the subway. It's not the tarmac. I've been in airports so long. It's the platform. He was at the platform. He was at the platform of the subway. He's a ghost. There's a can lying on the ground, and as a mortal man, he liked to kick cans. He tried to kick this can, and his foot went right through it because he's a ghost. And the more he tried to kick it, this is his man brain saying, I'm going to make that can move. So he scrunched up his face to get red. His veins are popping out. And he's trying harder and harder to do the same thing that didn't work the first time, thinking it's going to make a difference the next time he does it. And he's getting really frustrated, and the can's not going anywhere. And all of a sudden, another ghost comes by and says, hey, man, it doesn't work that way. Can't do it like that here anymore. He says, you got to feel it. And the minute he did that, the can was moving. He was moving it, kicking it all over the place. It's a perfect example. It's that subtle, that little shift of coming from the place where we feel that somehow we're going to make or impose our will upon the world to the switch that comes from the place that our heart's desire has already happened. It simply has not been mirrored in the physical reality yet. That's how those healings happened. That's how the peace happens. Does that make sense? I see a furrowed eyebrow or two. It's a very different way for the Western mind to think. Remember the scientific experiment that's happening? We saw in Journal Nature early in this program that said observation creates reality. Okay, what we now know is the way we feel, our expectations about our world literally are rearranging the stuff our world is made of on subtle levels if it's a passing expectation. But if we can hold that focus and be very clear about where and how it happens, that is where the miracles happen. That is how you bring change into your world. And we do it through a heart-based experience. And this is what I'd like to do in the time that we have remaining. I want to be very clear. I'm working closely, I have since 1991, with an organization called the Institute of Heart Math. HEARTMATH. How many here have heard of Heart Math? Quite a few? Okay, great. Good people. If you've never heard of them, they are a pioneering research organization that have come from many walks of life. They're medical doctors, authors, engineers, scientists, computer designers, medical technicians. They've left their respective careers at Stanford University, UCLA, private corporations, all come together to study the power of the human heart in ways that have never been explored before. If you haven't heard of them, you're going to a lot, and I'm going to share with you the reason why. There's a new initiative that the media is very excited about that allows all of us to participate in a heart-based experience to bring a transformational shift to the magnetic fields of this planet. Before we do that, let's have some experiences that are the kind that will contribute to that project, and then we'll talk about that a little bit. You okay if we do it that way? One of the things that HeartMath was able to establish in the early 90s is this image, and you've seen it a lot of magazines, articles, that there is a physical field. I mean, this isn't New Age metaphor. It's not the aura. It's not the prana. It's not the chakra. It might be linked to those. This is an electrical and a magnetic field that can be measured around the human heart that looks like a little donut called the torus. It's a tube torus that extends 5 to 8 feet beyond every human heart. We're all within 5 to 8 feet. Actually, we're pretty close in this room. So might be 450, 500 people in the room, but there's a heart field. We are all sharing a heart field in here right now. And it's so real, we can work with it, and we're going to. So what I'd like to do is this. We're going to go through a little process. The steps to the process might look familiar, but the techniques are what I'd like to share with you today. We're going to learn how to focus in our heart. And this, I think, in Western audiences is the most difficult thing to do. You know what I've found? If you tell someone to focus in their heart, you know what they do? They think about focusing in their heart because that's our conditioning. So it's like a muscle. We have to work with it. We're going to feel very precise kinds of feelings, and we're going to do some breathing. So before we can do that, what I'd like to do is this. I knew it would be very fast. This probably isn't the cleanest way to do this in here, but I'm going to do it this way anyway. What I'd like to do, let me do this. I'm going to bring this up. They have a piece of software that they have allowed me to use as an independent author. Remember, I said if we can measure either pulse transit time, heart rate variability, or respiration, it will give us an idea of the coherence. Who in here would like to have your coherence? Would you like to do it? You're the first one with your hand up. Would you, if you'll come to this side, what's your name? Charlotte. And how do you feel about mathematics? Do you like math? Oh, we're going to have fun. This is Charlotte. Charlotte, this is our audience. If you come up, please give Charlotte a hand for coming up here and being brave. Would you have a seat in this chair? Okay, now, have we ever met before? Do I have anything in my sleeves? No. All right.
We already know each other.
Yes, I know. All right, so what we have here, it's a really sophisticated piece of software made very simple to use. This is called an M-Wave PC, EM, Emotional Wave PC. There are a lot of different modes that we can use. And what I'm going to ask you to do, if you'll take your index finger, place it in this cuff, to where the fleshy part of your finger is over the little diode underneath. And your right, this hand, and then I'm going to ask you just to put it right. Can you feel the little diode in there underneath your finger?
Yeah.
And comfortable. And if you'll have your hand motionless, and you can either put it on your leg or you can set it on this desk, whatever you'd like to do. Okay, and I'm going to go into a mode. It's a kind of a technical looking mode, but there's a lot of things that we can do here. And we'll begin. It's going to do a little calibration. And I'm not asking her or you to do anything special right now. So it's going to calibrate. What you see is up on the top of this, we're going to actually be able to look at her heart rate variability. And I believe these are, I think they're 30-second windows here. This is her current heart rate. It's at 83. And in just a moment, it's going to take all the information that's getting from her body, from Charlotte. And Charlotte, you can see it right there on the screen. Everything that's happening, and it's going to determine her coherence ratio between low, medium, and high, red, blue, and green. There's no contest. Everybody is different, and usually this is what happens. 100% red, because that's the way we are in our daily lives until we make a change. Okay? So this is precisely what we want to have happen here. What I'd like to do, I'm going to ask Charlotte to do something, and I'm going to ask you all to help from where you are. And I'm going to ask that you not watch the screen. You've seen it. You know what's going on here. If you watch the screen, you're mesmerized by the technology, and you can't go into your heart if your focus is there. So I'm going to invite you first to close your eyes. Everybody just close your eyes. Put your notebooks down for a few seconds here. Charlotte, if you'll do the same thing. You won't need to take any notes on this. When I ask you to move into your heart, please close your eyes. When I ask you to move into your heart, what I learned from the Tibetans and from my native friends is the best way to do this, it's a secret that they use all the time, is if you will physically touch the center of your chest, touch your sternum over your heart. You can either do it momentarily, or you can place your hand there and leave it there, or you can form a prayer mudra and hold it there. But the physical sensation that you feel in that part of your body will automatically draw your awareness to that place. This is why they ask you not to cross your legs or all these other things, because if you're feeling a pressure between your knees or your thighs, your awareness is going there as well. So when you can just sit and you feel a light pressure in the center of your chest, okay? And if you'll move your attention to that part, move your attention into your heart and begin to breathe from that place just for a moment. All right, if you'll continue to breathe and into your heart center, to the best of your ability, if you can feel the feelings of gratitude and appreciation. Okay, gratitude and appreciation for anything, whatever that means to you. Everyone has a different experience of gratitude and appreciation. For some people, it's a look of their children's eyes when they wake up in the morning and they're happy just because they woke up. Or for some people, it's looking into the eyes of your spiritual master in your meditations, into the eyes of Mary or Jesus or Buddha or God. For some people, it's the feeling that you feel when you hold a newborn child in your arms, or you hold a brand new puppy or a little kitty in your arms. Whatever that feeling is for you, if you can feel those feelings of gratitude and appreciation. And as you feel those feelings in your heart, if you can breathe from that place, breathe those feelings of gratitude and appreciation. Okay? Keep your awareness in your heart. Remember to breathe. Just feel the feelings of gratitude and appreciation. As you feel them in your heart, allow that feeling to move away from your body into the room around you. But this is an active process of focus, gratitude, and appreciation in your heart. It's not about zoning out. Okay? To the best of your ability, feel those feelings of gratitude and appreciation. Okay, if you take one more deep breath and slowly begin to open your eyes. And we can see what happened here. We began, Charlotte, you did a really good job. Thank you. We didn't have a good connection on her finger at first, and it wasn't tight enough. She has a tiny little index finger, and it was bouncing around. But once we began to get the readings, right in here, we started getting good readings, and almost immediately, see, she was in 100% low coherence when we hooked her up, as most people are. If you just walk in from the street and you sit down, you're in a low coherent state. But within, and this is why I wanted you to see this, once we got this finger, can you see where it's jumping up and down here? The finger cuff isn't on right. But once we got the good connection, look at this. This is a minute between 2 and 3, and then there's about another half a minute. So in a minute and a half, once we got that connection going, she went from a 100% low coherence down to 72% low coherence, 15% medium, and 13% high. And those numbers kept climbing. If we went ahead and did this for another minute, 2 minutes, what we'd see, and this is what we do, what we'd see is the red would begin to decrease, and we'd see more and more coming up on the other side. And it happens really quickly if we can follow the focus into our heart without zoning out. But a lot of people are trained, when they go into that space, they just doze off. I mean, I've had people snore, and that's okay. Just when you wake up, get back with the program, Or if the person next to you wakes you up, you'll be with the program. I wanted you to see how quickly, in a minute and a half, she was already in 13% high coherence. That's how quickly your heart will respond if you give it something to work with. We're going to do this one more time. Charlotte, you did a really good job. I'm going to unhook this. Thank you. And you can unhook this. And you're now in 13% high coherence. Have a really good day. And thank you. Thank you, Charlotte. You can go down this way. Don't do this while you're driving. Actually, you want to do it while you're driving. I need another volunteer. Because this looks a little technical, not so much fun. I had the opportunity to put my hands on the tummy of an infant within about 24 hours of coming into this world. And it was a really powerful experience for both of us. We were hooked up on the monitor, and it was very, very cool to see how this happened. So this looks a little sterile, looks a little technical, a little left brain. It's good if you want to know what's happening. But you can use this. Young people like to see pictures. Children, adults like to see pictures. There's another mode that we can use this. And what's your name?
Phyllis.
Phyllis, hi. Welcome to the stage. Audience is Phyllis. Phyllis, this is the audience. If you would be so kind, if you can put your finger in there until the fleshy part of your index finger is over that little diode and it feels, not all the way through. You want the fleshy part of
this part, right?
You want the fleshy part of your finger to feel that little diode underneath. Can you feel it there? And if you can you take off an earring? I'm going to do something else as well. There's a different mode that we can use here that's a lot more fun. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a garden, because we've always heard that we live in a garden anyway, right? We came to the garden of this world. We're going to make it beautiful. What should happen here, if I do this well, that garden doesn't look very exciting. It's all in black and white. What will happen is the sensor will pick up what's happening in the room. When you do what you're doing, because we're sharing a heart field, to some degree, we are all being picked up. We're all sharing a heart field in this room. And as the sensor goes through, every 7 seconds, it will take a reading of the coherence and it will populate this garden, depending on what that coherence looks like. Okay, so you okay if we do that? All right, so let's do this one more time. If you don't watch this, because you'll be mesmerized. You'll be mesmerized when this happens. Close your eyes, touch the center of your chest, move your heart awareness into your chest, and just breathe. Just breathe from that space. Focus at the place of your body where you feel that sensation. Out of your mind and into your heart. And to the best of your ability, feel for you what are feelings of gratitude and appreciation. Gratitude and appreciation for anything, whatever that means to you. We've all got something to feel gratitude for in this world. And continue breathing. Just feel the feelings of gratitude and appreciation in your heart. Keep your focus in your heart. Touch that place right over the center of your heart. This is what the monks and the nuns do. They feel the feeling of gratitude and appreciation for the things that they choose to bring to fruition in this world. And you can do this in your life. Feel the gratitude and appreciation for the healing of your loved ones, as if it's already happened. The healing of your own body. For the healing that happens in every moment of every day. Feel it right now. Breathe that feeling into your heart. For the safety of our loved ones, the safety of our children, the peace between nations that's already happened. Gratitude and appreciation for the new world that began with the election of a new leader in this country. The whole world is watching. Gratitude and appreciation for the opportunity to choose. Touch the center of your heart. Touch it with your hands. And just breathe that feeling into the world. And you're doing right now exactly what those monks and nuns were trained to do. If you take one more deep breath and slowly begin to open your eyes. How many of you have ease finding that gratitude and appreciation in your hearts? You do it? Is it hard for anyone to find that place? We found even with young children who have had really tough lives, if you can tell those children to feel what it feels like when they hold a baby bunny in their arms, even kids that have had a tough time can feel that. We had problems with a connection up here, but we got a little bit. We got some color in our waterfall. If we had done this longer, we'd populate the whole garden. I promised that I would honor our time frames here today, but you get the idea. You get the idea of what this feeling is all about, right? It's not a feeling that you think about in your mind. It's something that you create in your heart. You did a great job. Thank you very much. You helped us populate a waterfall a little bit. Thank you very much. And we're almost finished. One more thing. Okay, so what you're doing right now, that feeling in your heart, stems from a new discovery that Earth and the magnetic fields of the Earth and the human heart work in the same frequencies. In other words, we're feeling those feelings, and our heart is 5,000 times stronger magnetically than our brain. What we're actually doing is we're communicating with the very fields that sustain life on Earth. This has led to this new project bringing millions of people together across cultural boundaries, religious, spiritual, international boundaries. It doesn't even matter what belief system, how you meditate or how you pray, bring everyone together to create coherence in a very precise way. It's led to a hypothesis that when many of us come together, strong collective emotion has a measurable impact. Our satellites are telling this on the fields of the Earth, a new project that is now called the Global Coherence Initiative. I'm going to talk just a minute about what it is, how you can participate if you choose. The goal is to unite millions of people from varied beliefs and cultures to shift global consciousness from instability and chaos into balance and cooperation by doing just the kinds of things that you are doing right now. The Institute of Heart Math is heading this up. It's a two-phase project. They are building hundreds of sensors, deploying them throughout the world to measure the fields that tell us about our hearts. And then they are training. Their goal is to have trained 100,000 people by the end of next month. We're about 2/3 of the way there right now in the techniques that you're learning to do. If you would like to know more about the Global Coherence Initiative, if you go to my webpage, the home page in the middle, there's a button that says click here to learn about Global Coherence Initiative. You'll have a slideshow, and it will tell you how to do everything from a passive observer just to watch this project. If you want to become a member of a community and have your data input, you can do that. If you want to become a trainer and teach people a myriad of techniques working with the Heart Math folks, you can do that. It's all right there. I'm excited about this project because it is the first time a science-based initiative has been embraced by the global media, and it's happening right now. It's happening right now at a time that the experts are telling us you and I are living a time unlike any other time of 5,000 years of recorded human history. The world is changing, the cycles are converging, and the very fields that sustain life on the earth, you and I are learning to communicate with those fields, commune with those fields, through our hearts, which we were born to do to begin with. Your heart is the one organ in your body that creates the strongest electrical, the strongest magnetic field, much stronger than your brain. And it's all coming together at the close of a great cycle as we end one world age and move into the next. What a beautiful, beautiful convergence of experience. Right now, we are posed on the precipice. We've got a choice. Where are we going? It's yet to be decided. You and I are making the choice right now. And the question is, what are we choosing? You now have the language with which to make that choice. And everything we've done in here is a context for everything that you will see in this conference, in your world, in your life beyond. We ran over a few minutes. I want to tell you how much I appreciate this time together. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for our volunteers. God bless. Have a really good day. Thank you.
For another amazing Gregg Braden video, check it out right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
I'm going to begin just, first of all, talking about what we're going to do today. I'd like to talk about this 2012 phenomenon a little bit. It is a fact that you and I are living the last years of a rare